Good morning. Welcome everybody to our April board meeting of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. As we begin the meeting today, I want to be sure everyone is aware that, as in the past, this meeting is being broadcast via the internet. So at any point during the meeting, not only those of us up here, but those of you in the audience may be visible to anyone watching online. So please silence your cell phones, and I'm sure we'll all be on our best behavior with that in mind. Before we begin, I'd like to remember one of our colleagues here at the Coordinating Board, Andy Kessling, who passed away on April 8th after battling with a year-long illness. Andy was the Coordinating Board's Assistant Director of Communications and was really instrumental in launching our Generation Texas campaign, the statewide marketing campaign to create a college-going and college-ready culture. He was a consummate professional, and I understand that in the days leading up to his death, he was still working on those things he was passionate about. He was also a passionate advocate for education, which is evidenced by his own twin children, Kimball and Kyle, who are first-year college students. On behalf of the board, I want to extend our most sincere sympathy to Andy's wife, Christine, and Kimball and Kyle. Andy was a great person, and his passing is a great loss to each and every one of us. And so let me just ask for a moment of silence to remember Andy. Thank you. On April 14th, Governor Perry hosted both myself and House Higher Education Chairman Dan Branch and the Commissioner to unveil the inaugural Texas Public Higher Education Almanac. As you know, the Almanac represents a new agency effort, and this is what it looks like, by the way, for those who may not have seen it. Board members, you have one of these at your place. It represents our effort to improve transparency, accountability, and value in higher education. The Almanac was specifically designed to place the most relevant data and information on institutional performance in the hands of policymakers, students, parents, and the general public. Most importantly, the Almanac represents a working collaboration between our agency and philanthropic organizations dedicated to improving higher education in Texas, a true public-private partnership. In this vein, I'd like to recognize our partners, the Communities Foundation of Texas, Greater Texas Foundation, the Houston Endowment, Incorporated, the Meadows Foundation, the Texas High School Project, the Lumina Foundation for Education, and the College for All Texans Foundation. Without all these dedicated partners, we could not have produced this almanac. In addition to the almanac, we also released the institution's Strategies for Increasing Post-Secondary Student Success, simply referred to as the Student Success Handbook. The publication documents the best national and state practices at institutions of higher education designed to improve student success rates. The handbook is intended to encourage the sharing of innovative practices and ideas throughout Texas. Our hope is that institutional leaders will use this publication, in fact both these publications, to replicate those programs and set performance benchmarks that have proved most successful. Now, I would like to recognize the recipient of the Kenneth Ashworth Fellowship Award for 2011-2012. The Kenneth Ashworth Fellowship Award, named after former Commissioner of Higher Education, provides a $2,000 scholarship to students with financial need who are enrolled in graduate programs in public affairs, public service, or public administration. I'm pleased to announce the recipient of this award for 2011-2012, Christopher Bollinger. Christopher is a Doctor of Philosophy candidate majoring in Communication Sciences and Disorders at Texas Tech University Health Science Center. Unfortunately, Christopher was unable to join us today because he is in class, which is where he should be, I suppose. But I'd like to congratulate him for this achievement and wish him the best in successfully completing his graduate studies. So I think it's okay to give him a brief round of applause in absentia. Do we have any new presidents or chancellors with us in the audience today? I haven't been slipped my traditional note, but I don't want to overlook someone if we have a new president or chancellor. If not, then the last thing I would like to do is to take a little time to do a recognition of some outgoing outgoing board members. One outgoing board member and two plucked board members who are no longer with us today, and one who is Eric Rohn, but also Wallace Hall and Elaine Mendoza. First, I want to turn our attention to recognizing Eric Rohn, our student representative for the past year. We were able to say a few kind things about Eric at dinner last night, but I want to again tell him how much we've enjoyed serving with him, and for the first time having a student representative who brought us the undergraduate perspective to this board, and whether the issues were affordability or success or what have you. And Eric, we appreciate your service. So I'm going to read this very formal sounding resolution in your honor. Whereas Eric A. Rohn was appointed as student representative of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by Governor Rick Perry on June 1st, 2010, and whereas Mr. Rohn came to the board with many accomplishments, serving as a member of the Texas A&M University Corpus Christi Student Accounting Society and Campus Activities Board, past president of the Student Government Association, past student ambassador for the high school summer bridge program, past vice president of recruitment for the A&M Corpus Christi Interfraternity Council, and past president of the Order of Omega Honor Society. And whereas during his tenure on the coordinating board, Mr. Rohn served with great enthusiasm on the committees on closing the gaps, strategic planning and policy, and agency operations, and whereas in addition to attending A&M Corpus Christi full-time in pursuit of a bachelor's degree in finance from Texas A&M Corpus Christi and participating in a number of college-related activities, Mr. Rohn successfully managed his time in order to attend and participate in all our board meetings and conferences, somehow, some way. And whereas Mr. Rohn has helped the board and its staff understand the student's perspective on critical issues such as college readiness, affordability, persistence, and completion, and now therefore be it resolved that the members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board on the 27th day of April 2011 express our deepest appreciation to Eric Rohn for his distinguished service as the student representative of this board and his unwavering dedication to higher education for all students in Texas. And be it further resolved that the resolution be included in the minutes and that a copy of the resolution signed by the members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board be presented to Mr. Rohn in recognition of the high esteem in which he is held. Eric, thank you. Now I'll actually sign that resolution. Pass it on to others. All right. Secondly, in recognition of Wallace Hall, and Wallace and Elaine could not be here this morning, but because of their service on the board, we want to take a moment and read these other two resolutions into the record. Whereas Wallace L. Hall, Jr. was appointed to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by Governor Rick Perry September 1st, 2009, and whereas during his term on the coordinating board, Mr. Hall served with great distinction as chair and vice chair of the Committee on Agency Operations and as a member of the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy, and whereas Mr. Hall actively engaged in the board's strategic planning process, which resulted in the accelerated plan for closing the gaps by 2015 and the development of a long-term vision to transform Texas into a national and international leader in higher education by 2030. And whereas although Governor Perry appointed him to the University of Texas System Board of Regents prior to the expiration of his term on the coordinating board, Mr. Hall's leadership and contributions have greatly benefited the board, its staff, and all institutions of higher education. And whereas Mr. Hall will undoubtedly continue to serve with great honor and distinction as a regent, now therefore be it resolved that the members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board on this 27th day of April 2011 express our deep appreciation to Wallace Hall for his distinguished service as a member of the board and his dedication to higher education for all the people of Texas. And be it further resolved that the resolution be included in the minutes and that a copy of the resolution signed by the members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board be presented to Mr. Hall in recognition of the high esteem in which he is held. So if everyone would recognize Wallace with a round of applause. The last member we'd like to recognize, Elaine Mendoza, our former vice chairman. Spoke with her yesterday, and she really wanted to be here, but she didn't realize we changed the meeting from Thursday to Wednesday, so until a couple of days ago. And so she was not able to join us this morning, where we would have endeavored to embarrass her a lot more than just this resolution. But she did say to pass on her greetings to her fellow board members and the commissioner and the folks that she enjoyed working with in the audience for so many years. So whereas Elaine Mendoza was appointed to the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board by Governor Rick Perry on January 23, 2006, and whereas during her 5 years of service with the Coordinating Board, Ms. Mendoza served with great distinction and dedication as Vice Chair and Secretary to the Board, Chair of the Committee on Closing the Gaps, and Vice Chair of the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy. And whereas Ms. Mendoza is widely respected for her passionate belief that education builds strong communities, a competitive business environment, and a prosperous economic future for Texas. And whereas Ms. Mendoza was instrumental during the development and adoption of the Texas College and Career Readiness Standards, the accelerated plan for closing the gaps, and the long-term vision for national and international excellence in Texas higher education. And whereas Ms. Mendoza played a critical role in the launch of the Generation Texas campaign in San Antonio to create a college-going and college-ready culture which will positively impact generations to come. And whereas, although Governor Perry appointed her to the Texas A&M University System Board of Regents prior to the expiration of her term on the Coordinating Board, Ms. Mendoza's leadership and contributions have greatly benefited the board, its staff, and all institutions of higher education. And whereas Ms. Mendoza will undoubtedly continue to serve with great honor and distinction as a regent, now therefore be it resolved that the members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board on the 27th day of April 2011 express our deepest appreciation to Elaine Mendoza for her distinguished service as an influential member of this board and her unwavering dedication to higher education for all the people of Texas. And be it further resolved that the resolution be included in the minutes and that a copy of the resolution signed by the members of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board be presented to Ms. Mendoza in recognition for the high esteem in which she is held. Elaine, if you're listening, thank you. And now that the exciting part of the agenda is concluded, we'll move on to item number 2, the approval of minutes from the October board meeting. Do I have a motion for approval of these minutes?
Move to approve.
I have a motion and a second from Mr. Hahn and Mr. Ryder. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next is the consent calendar for the entire meeting. The consent calendar includes non-controversial items that we think can be approved without comment or discussion. This allows us to save time for other items that need more of our attention. Of course, any board member can request that an agenda item be removed from the consent calendar. That gives us the opportunity to discuss it fully later in the meeting. At this time, would any board member like to remove an item from the consent calendar? My script says that someone wanted to remove the agenda item. We discussed this briefly yesterday from the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy portion of the agenda. Item BL7, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to proposed Chapter 21 Student Services, new Chapter SS, Sections 21.2270 through 21.2273 of the board rules concerning the exemption program for children of deployed members of the military. Do we still want to remove that item?
Yes, please.
Okay. Committee Chairman Hahn has requested removal of that item. Is there a second to do so? I have a motion and a second. Do I hear, all in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. So that item BL7 will be removed from the consent agenda. Does any board member want to add an item to the consent calendar? Well, I'm going to propose that we add item 8F, also under strategic planning and policy, to the consent agenda. That way we'll keep the balance here. That's an item that was a higher education impact study regarding U of H Clear Lake's downward expansion. That bill is, I believe, already passed the Senate, and the impact study has been vetted, and there have been no further impact studies this session.
So moved.
We have a motion from Mr. Hahn. Is there a second? Second from Mr. Ryder. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. So with those two changes to the consent calendar, do I hear a motion to approve the consent calendar as modified?
So moved.
Motion from Mr. Ryder. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Mr. Hinton. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Now we'll move on to agenda item 5. The recognition of excellence item is meant to showcase models of excellence within the education community and highlight the outstanding work of education faculty and administrators in institutional programs around our state. Today we have Dr. Uri Treisman, founder and director of the Charles A. Dana Center at the University of Texas at Austin. The Dana Center collaborates with local and national entities to improve education systems, particularly in mathematics and science. Dr. Treisman will make a presentation on the benefits of this program and efforts regarding developmental education for mathematics. Dr. Treisman, welcome.
It's a privilege to be with you today. Texas has been a font of innovation in education, and I hope that you guys take some proper measure of pleasure in the role you play in that innovation, and that I hope personally that it balances some of the abuse that you might get occasionally for playing that leadership role. I don't need to tell you that developmental education has been a burial ground for the aspirations of myriad students seeking to improve their lives through education. You have the data on Texas. It's really a national problem. Chancellor Jack Scott of the California Community College System announced a few months ago that 35,000 students in that system were repeating a developmental course for at least the 5th time. So much for the students' lack of persistence or motivation. And they had to turn away 144,000 students from that system. This coming fall in the Tacoma Community College in Washington State, there are no open spaces for new students to take math. The failure rates are so high that all the spaces were filled by students who enrolled in the spring. So we're seeing in many community colleges students taking an average of 2 to 3 times to complete these courses. And this suggests that the problem is not just with lack of student preparation, but there's clear evidence that these courses do not even work for students who are well prepared. And I want to point out some data to you that will give you a sense of the problem as I see it on the national front. So I'm a professor of mathematics, and that means there are going to be numbers in this presentation. There'll only be a gentle test maybe at the end. So we're going to have data shortly from Paco Martorell's RAND study of Texas community colleges. This is a graph drawn from complete data from the state of Florida, which has an extremely good data system relative to other states, including ours. And what you see here is a curve broken by a line. That line represents the cutoff point on their state placement test for developmental education. If you move to the right of it, 10 points, 20 points, 30 points, even 1 point, you go directly into the regular college credit transferable courses. To the left, you're referred to developmental education. If you look at that straight line, students just to the right and just to the left are pretty close in ability, even within an error. So you would expect that if students took developmental ed, the students on the left, they'd get a boost from that and they would do better in their first college course. But in fact, in Florida, Texas, and Ohio, there's no evidence that these courses actually add value to the students who take them, and increase their performance in subsequent courses. But I want to point out a subtle point, that if you look to the far right of this graph, on the x-axis is the number of points above the cutoff. So we're looking at students 30 points above the cutoff, nearly perfect scores on their placement test. On the y-axis is the percentage of them who pass their first credit-bearing college math course, and fewer than half the students with perfect scores actually complete and pass their first credit-bearing course. So many policymakers think of developmental education properly as a broken system, and they want to build a new 6-lane highway into higher education. But this shows that we may be building a 6-lane highway into a swamp. Right? The problem is not merely the high failure rates in developmental education, it's also the high failure rates of students who come in with high levels of preparation into the regular freshman mathematics courses in their colleges. So this looks like the catalytic converter diagram from my old Ford. I've repurposed it for this presentation. For about every 1,000 students who enroll in community colleges, only about 32% who go into developmental education make it through that sequence. And only about 45% of them actually pass their first credit-bearing course. So when you look at the students who start in arithmetic, and you go out and look at data on campuses, they sometimes tell you the names of the students who've made it all the way through. And as a professional mathematician and statistician, I can tell you that when you name the students, you don't need to worry about third-order moments of distributions. Right? There are very few survivors making it through this system. And the costs to us as a state are too high, and the cost to those students is even higher. And that's the tragedy of it. So what are the problems? There's a nested set of problems in a broken system that you, as our leaders, need to address through policy. And some of these are subtle, they've not gotten a lot of attention, and others have properly gotten attention by the board. The first is that the goals of these developmental sequences are way outdated. They're more shaped by the weight of history than they are by current workforce needs or the needs of current university majors connected to a meaningful life, economic life. Everything is focused toward a track for engineers, toward calculus. You take arithmetic, algebra, intermediate algebra, and all these courses that line up for engineering majors. But in fact, in 2005, only 6% of community college enrollment was in calculus. That's it, 6%, and it's going down. The new census that comes out in a month will show a marked decrease. More students take statistics than calculus, and workforce studies show that many more students, many more workers need to know statistics than they do calculus. When's the last time, gentlemen, that you used the mean value theorem in your work? Right? Compared to the last time that you had to make sense of statistical information and uncertainty. It's time to modernize these programs so they actually speak to the objective needs of the workforce. Right? And when you look at that, you can see the freshman courses are beginning to do that. Calculus, important for engineers, essential. I've taught it for 51 years now. Beautiful subject. Statistics, even more important now for STEM careers. And then advanced quantitative reasoning, the new 12th grade course that the board approved for our seniors in Texas, where students learn modeling and how to use high school mathematics to solve original problems. We have a pathway that comes from the 1950s that was aimed at one narrow goal. Time to modify this, right, and not build a preparation for too narrow a pathway. Structure. Some of our community colleges have 4, some have 5 courses before you actually start college. I do lots of work for the military. I've been interviewing vets. One young vet told me that by the time he finishes his sequence, he'll be ready to retire. 2/3 of the students who fail to complete pass every course they take. They fail to complete because the sequence is too long and life interrupts. We need many more students taking mandatory accelerated programs as soon as they start college and get this out of the way that are directly linked to credit-bearing transferable courses. Our system is attempting to teach people stuff we wish they had learned in high school. It's time to build a second chance system that focuses on making sure they can pass legitimate, sanctioned, credit-bearing college courses. Other problems. Placement. In too many Texas colleges, students show up after the summer, sit down, and take a placement test with consequences they do not understand. They get placed in courses that they've already passed in high school, and Jessica Howell's study in California, Complete Census, shows that the typical student starting developmental mathematics in California had a 3.1 better than B average in their high school math courses. Right? So there's some disconnect here, and my colleagues would like to blame it on the high schools, but I've been in a lot of Texas high schools, and they have gotten tremendously better. This is a shared problem, and the placement tests are not aligned with either the high school curriculum today or, in fact, the new freshman courses that institutions are offering. So students show up, it's a one-shot deal. They don't understand that if they don't take it seriously or they don't practice, they may have to start 2 years behind where they're really prepared to start. We need better policy on this, a uniform test, and structures that allow students to practice before they show up for that examination. Probably a letter explaining to them the financial cost to us and them of not doing well, right? At least so that they understand and can sign that they understand the consequences, right, of this incredibly important instrument. This is easy policy to make, and it's easy local policy to make. We need to do it. I have seen thousands of students now just show up and say, it doesn't really matter. It really does matter. Articulation. Articulation creates a littered landscape of lost credits. Right now, if you want to innovate in these courses, you're trapped in an iron cage created years and years ago. We have a system in which one dyspeptic math faculty member can block something, where individual faculty in certain institutions get to decide what tens of thousands of people need in their courses. We need to figure out who the stakeholders are in articulation decisions and broaden decision-making so it includes our business community, other academic disciplines, and cannot be blocked by one person on a bad day. We need to look more carefully at a unique needs process so that it actually supports innovation while respecting the need for quality and transportability. Student support. We've reviewed now the student support systems in many courses, in many colleges. They're all over the map. There's no scientific basis for them. More students than one would imagine desire mandatory, structured, just-in-time support rather than services over there, and this is particularly true for our 25-year and older students who don't have the freedom to really participate in the full life of campuses. The point of delivery needs to be their classrooms. And our commissioner will remember this, 30, 40 years ago, we do remember that, Raymond, yes? Yeah. Many of the advising and teaching roles, the advising and counseling roles, were professionalized out of the faculty. For community college students, we need to recenter responsibilities for student success in the faculty role. And the challenge will be that 2/3 of these courses are now taught by adjuncts in many institutions. The adjuncts are just as good at teaching as regular faculty, but they're not paid to do advising, counseling, student support, and they're not paid to improve the developmental education system. We need to rethink what we can do to improve the quality of these courses and the engagement of the people who really teach them in ways that nurture student success. And last, improvement infrastructure. On every campus now, Faculty have been told to improve the system they teach in, but they have no tools for doing that. Declaring someone an innovator doesn't mean they can innovate. These institutions face common problems, and they need to work on common solutions to common problems that can scale across systems. And it's time to introduce incentives for relentless process improvement protocols on these campuses, as well as product innovation. So, what are we doing? Institutions need a small portfolio of strategies that serve almost all of our students. We know people are experimenting with Emporium, with just-in-time courses, with modular courses. We think, in addition to that, many students need highly structured new pathways to and through college credit transferable courses. And with the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching as the lead partner, the Dana Center has built 2 of these and is beginning work on a 3rd. A Statway, a 1-year pathway to and through developmental mathematics that ends up with a high-quality sanctioned statistics course, a Quantway, advanced quantitative reasoning course, and a new pathway to calculus that actually works. These are accelerated. You get through them in 1 year. They're much cheaper. Coming to your next topic on your agenda, gentlemen. They're to and through. They're directly connected not to what we wish students had in the past, but what they need for the college credit course, just-in-time social and academic supports, and they're performance-based, common external examinations that assure the quality of the courses. The major mathematical societies have signed on and sanctioned the outcomes for these, and the Carnegie Foundation has made it a 10-year commitment to ensure the quality through high-quality evaluation research of them. Texas is part of the initial cohort. Austin, El Paso, Houston, Northwest Vista, and Richland are piloting these pathways, and the demand to participate is growing very quickly in them. Let me just end with this. We need freedom to innovate within an articulation system that preserves quality and transportability of credits. But you guys have to make sure that the policies that drive this, the carrots and sticks, are properly aligned. More of this can be dealt with through prevention. Why aren't all Texas high school students taking their placement tests while they're in high school, in the 11th grade? Why aren't we sending them a letter that if you did well, you don't need any of this if you continue to take math? And if you don't, the good news is that you have a year to get ready, and here are programs to do it. Students should not be taking these placement tests when they sit down the first day of community college. And districts like Hidalgo are already doing this. We need incentives, for funding incentives that are actually aligned with the completion agenda. That means performance. All parts of this focused on performance funding, not something that makes me popular back home. But I recognize that you create the carrots and sticks that guide us. And in doing that, I will end with the old biblical injunction, strength and courage. Because you have to get this right. Your signals actually affect what we do on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, members?
I have a question. If I can, Mr. Chairman.
Dennis?
You said something this morning that's kind of, I guess, a little bit different than what I've been programmed to think over a long period of time. And the phrase that I really locked in on was when you said that a substantial number of these students that fail are not ill-prepared. And so much of what I've been programmed to think for a number of years is that the reason students go into community colleges and then end up into remedial education and then fail remedial education is because they reach our institutions, quote, ill-prepared. I think the coordinating board has data to back up the fact that about 25%, I believe, of those students that enter remedial education in the state of Texas will go on to complete one college-level course after they complete the remedial process. And so help me understand and reiterate that statement if I heard it correctly, and help me understand what you mean by students that end up in remedial education and don't succeed do come there prepared, because so much of what we've been focusing on is vertically aligning our curriculum with the K through 16 and making sure that they go into the system prepared to succeed.
Yes, sir. So the population of community colleges is enormously diverse, but we have large numbers of students successfully completing high school being placed in elementary algebra and arithmetic. Those students should be successful in these courses. So here's an experiment we did, just to give you the texture of this. In a Massachusetts community college, they had the same problem. They had an army of students who passed Algebra 2 in high school being placed in elementary algebra. About 70% of them failed their elementary algebra course historically in that institution. So we did an experiment. We took a class, we gave them the final exam for elementary algebra, and we gave them 3 hours to work at it together. They hadn't met each other yet. We filmed it. First 5 or 10 minutes, the students went, I never saw anything like this. I can't do this. And after a few minutes, they started working together. By the end, they had gotten a nearly perfect score on the algebra test. And one of the very senior professors looked into the camera and he said, oh my God, before I teach it, they know it, but after I teach it, they don't. It was a moment of great humility. There are students who really are coming back who never passed any of these courses. But when we look very carefully at the students being placed in elementary algebra, there is a large number of them that took a year off or took a summer off. What they actually need is a week of preparation. Some of them need 4 hours of preparation, and they could save a year of developmental education courses. Texas high school math courses are much, much stronger than they were 10, 15 years ago because of the alignment work and the good work at TEA and of the state board. Yes, there are students who failed all those courses and are using this as a completely new second chance, but we can't brand the whole group as unprepared. There are a large number of these students who actually can do the work with just-in-time support and bridging support. And I think if we shift the focus to the assets of this population, we're going to have more success than if we think of it totally as a totally unprepared population, which it isn't. And yes, only about, I think, 27% of students who start in developmental math actually pass a credit-bearing math course. That's insane, because these are the students who've made a decision to improve their lives through education. They're not the students who've given up on education as a future. The fact that only about a quarter of the students who start in that sequence actually pass a credit-bearing course is a disaster. Right? We should be looking at 75% of those students passing it, not 25%. So I do challenge the idea that this is a myriad group of unprepared students. I think there are some who need massive preparation, and we should have a pathway for people who want to improve their lives as a second chance through education. But I think we're misunderstanding the assets in that population, and that's leading us to trouble.
I'd like to have a follow-up question if I could. How are we going to understand what students go into remedial education and which ones are prepared for college-level mathematics courses without testing them? I mean, you're not proposing that we don't test?
No, I'm proposing we have one common assessment, and that students have opportunities to take it early while in high school where they can really deal with it.
Okay.
And then for students who don't take it in high school or need to do further work, that they have online a system for preparing for it before they take it, given its high stakes. And we should create incentives for those students to prepare themselves to do well, because it would save us a lot of money as a state.
Mr. Chairman, can I have one more question? I'd like for you, I understand what you're saying, and thank you for those comments. I would like to hear your comment on the effects of social promotions within our public schools and the effects it has or has had in the past on where these students end up in terms of their college readiness skills when they go into our community colleges. I see less of that occurring than I did 10 years ago, but I can assure you, from my perspective, it's still a problem.
Yeah, I have not looked carefully at that. When I did look at it about 10 years ago when it was a big issue, this is an issue that keeps coming back over and over again. It seemed that the data were really quite difficult to parse, and there were clearly students who benefited from ending social promotion, and there were some who were harmed, which meant we need a process of parent and school collaboration to look at to make sure we don't inadvertently create victims. But the general principle I'm for, right? If we push people forward without preparing them, they just go into a cycle of decline and essentially disengage.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Hahn?
At the risk of making you even more unpopular, you've indicated that we as a board, we have the carrot and the stick. But what about the universities? I mean, the data that you've presented today seems pretty clear-cut. Why are the universities not coming more forward and asking for these changes?
I'm a humble faculty member. I'm not an administrator at the university. But I think that we have to stand up as faculty members for more transparency and accountability. I think there are some days when it feels the most creative work in my sector is blocking the upward flow of accountability and transparency. I mean, we, like all other institutions, we're public institutions. We need to be held clearly to efficiency standards. Right? It needs to be easy for the public to understand the effects of our work, which are tremendous, and where we are wanting. So I'm one of those faculty members who just believes that accountability is going to be key. And I have to say that, at least in my institution, University of Texas at Austin, there's enormous creative work going on efficiency, improvement of freshman courses. I've never seen such a level of commitment to driving down costs and improving quality, including the fundamental redesign of many of our key large freshman courses, which haven't always served students well. So I'm proud of that. But as a system, without being held accountable for our work with clear outcomes that the public values, we'll lose our public support and will be less valuable contribution to our state.
Could I make
That's my own view, not my institution's. I'm speaking as just a citizen there.
We would love to have you testify on our behalf at some point before the legislature. Coming from a faculty member, I find that very refreshing. And I don't mean that to be necessarily derogatory or negative towards faculty and as a whole, but I think this agency has pushed hard and raised the bar in terms of our expectations in the area of transparency and efficiency and effectiveness. And accountability is something, and the last statement that you made was very, very crucial, is that we will lose public support if we don't move this direction. And I think this agency has a clear record in terms of the direction that we would like to see our institutions of higher education move. And this makes me feel much better having heard you say that, because I begin to realize that we are getting some faculty buy-in on this. And we have had a significant amount of faculty pushback in terms of moving this direction. I think that's human nature when you start making things change. Some people are a little uncomfortable, so I'm not overly concerned about it, but I think some of this is going to happen. This has been a very interesting and informing presentation. I thank you for being here.
Mr. Ryder, did you have a question?
Mr. Hahn hit
Okay.
exactly what I was
Commissioner?
gonna ask.
Sorry.
Good to see you, Uri. Uri and I have known each other for many, many years. We were colleagues together in the University of California. He was at Berkeley, I was at LA, but I've admired his work for many years. Uri, my primary question is, have you looked at the different assessments that institutions use for placing students in developmental ed, and have you got any opinions about which assessment seems to be superior to others?
I would look at Andrea Venezia's work, one-shot deal for a review of these. I don't think one is particularly better than others. I think they need to be redesigned around new pathways that have a strong evidence base and broad national sanction of professional academic societies and workforce involvement.
Do you think Florida was successful in doing that?
I think Florida has, like Texas, been a great source of innovation. They're sort of brothers under the skin, and I think we can learn a lot from them, and they can learn a lot from us.
Have you taken a look at the work that Dave Conley did for us in evaluating the different assessment tools we have for placement and developmental ed? If you haven't, I'd appreciate if you would take a look at those assessments. The conclusion that Conley reached was that the THEA, the Texas Higher Education Assessment, was most closely aligned with our college and career readiness standards. But we'd appreciate
I'll take a look. I have a lot of respect for Dave Conley, but I haven't actually looked at that piece of work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Treisman, one quick question. The mathematical enrollment trends, were those also based on Florida data?
No, that the Mathematical Enrollment Challenge is a national census done by the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences every 5 years. It's the 17 major professional organizations of mathematicians. It's quite an accurate census. It's about to be released again, and we'll see calculus going down, statistics going up. Just one last piece of data on that. This is the first time in American history, the 2005 census, where 1/3 of all high school students who go directly to college take calculus on their transcripts. There's been an explosion of advanced placement calculus. What happens to those students? So if you look at that, these are well-prepared students. Right? A half do not take any more mathematics. Half of them, rather, are placed in college algebra or below in college. So for our best students, those who take calculus, the placement system places half of them in courses they already completed, back at least 1 or 2. A third never take any more math or science. And of this remaining sixth, I am a professor of mathematics, so you can trust my lower mathematics. The remaining sixth, half of them fail to complete their first college math course after calculus. So we have a broken system here, not just developmental education, right? We have to look at the whole pathway, smooth articulated pathway from K-12 to and through higher education and into the workforce.
Any further questions?
Just one comment. If there is a test, Eric, I think, should take it as proxy.
Well, Dr. Treisman, we appreciate this great presentation and proving that humor and mathematics are not mutually exclusive, and also for the free second opinion regarding assessments. We've enjoyed it and look forward to working with you further.
It was a privilege.
Thank you. Now we will move on to agenda item 4, our major policy discussion regarding the $10,000 degree, developing low-cost options for students. This topic is in response to Governor Perry's challenge to Texas institutions of higher education to develop bachelor's degrees that cost $10,000, including textbooks, which he included in his State of the State address earlier this year. The discussion will be led by Commissioner of Higher Education Raymond Paredes and our Deputy Commissioner of Academic Planning and Policy, David Gardner, regarding the Governor's challenge. But we also have with us today a special guest, David Young, advisor to the Governor regarding higher education, and he will kick off our discussion by providing background on the Governor's challenge. David? Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the $10,000 degree. As you just mentioned, Governor Perry challenged higher education institutions in his State of the State speech to develop bachelor's degrees that cost $10,000, including textbooks. Since then, he's been asked if this is possible and why he set such an ambitious target. These are great questions, and I'll use them as the framework for my remarks this morning. According to human achievement expert Bob Mowad, most people don't aim too high and miss, they aim too low and hit, end quote. Texas can't afford to aim low and hit. In 2000, the proportion of Texans enrolling in higher education was behind the average of the 10 most populous states, and it was declining. In October of 2000, following the recommendations of the Special Commission on 21st Century Colleges and Schools, which Governor Perry formed when he was Lieutenant Governor, the Coordinating Board adopted Closing the Gaps. The plan challenged our higher education institutions to increase enrollment by 500,000 students by 2015, and then increase the goal in 2005 to 630,000 students. The revised target was higher than our enrollment growth over the previous 35 years. Our institutions accepted the challenge. By 2010, they increased enrollment by 463,000 students, and they are on track to meet the goal by 2015. We aimed high, and it's paying off. It's amazing what we can accomplish when we focus on a goal and work together towards its achievement. Their success, however, has created a new challenge. How do we pay for the expansion? The Coordinating Board estimated that it would cost $729.8 million to fund our most recent enrollment growth. Many of these students can't afford to go to college without financial aid. The last legislature increased funding for Texas Grant by $186.4 million, yet even with the increase, we only funded approximately 70% of eligible students. The cost to build new facilities is staggering too. Since 1999, the Texas legislature has authorized over $4 billion in tuition revenue bonds for the construction and renovation of facilities. Total debt service on tuition revenue bonds is $650 million. Our strategic plan will bring us to parity with the 10 most populous states, but we can't stop there. Last session, Governor Perry signed House Bill 51, which will create up to 7 new Tier 1 research universities. These are critical to our success as a national and international leader. However, they will require significant resources. It's clear that we can't afford to do business as usual. This is why Governor Perry issued an executive order in September 2009 calling for a review of cost efficiencies. Because of your hard work and the hard work of institutional and business leaders, we now have recommendations that would save $4.3 billion over 4 years. The cost-saving measures include improving credit hours produced per full-time faculty member, implementing competency-based advancements so students can graduate faster, streamlining administrative processes, and finding alternative methods of course delivery. These recommendations will help institutions make college more affordable. Bill Gates recently said that technology should help us bring down the cost of a bachelor's degree, not just to $20,000, but to $2,000. This inspired Governor Perry to challenge institutions to develop $10,000 bachelor's degrees that are scalable, so at least 10% of the degrees they produce use this approach. Texans are diverse, so these degrees won't be for everyone. But imagine the life-changing impact they will have on those who earn them. Texans are already taking advantage of opportunities to lower educational costs. For example, in 2008, 44% of our public high school graduates took at least one college-level course while in high school. Web-based courses are in demand too. Last year, 12.5% of all semester credit hours in Texas were taken online. In response to the changing marketplace, some of our Texas institutions are already offering alternative, low-cost pathways to a college degree. West Texas A&M University provides tools to help students finish associate degrees at community colleges and then transfer to West Texas A&M to earn bachelor's degrees. The University of Houston Victoria offers a traditional 4-year program in 3 years. The Texas Workforce Commission is working with the coordinating board and community colleges to give veterans credit for their skills and experience. Kudos to these institutions and the many others that are lowering cost and helping students achieve their dreams. Technology is a key to lowering cost, increasing access, and improving quality. According to the 2011 Horizon Report, mobile devices such as iPhones and iPads will transform higher education. Online learning tools help students determine their strengths and weaknesses, and interactive e-textbooks give students who need more help supplemental practice material. Education can now be tailored to individual students. If you aren't convinced yet that we can lower costs, consider this practice. Many university instructors develop their own online courses. This is inefficient. The community colleges have found a better way, and I encourage our universities to adopt a similar model. They offer online courses through a consortium of institutions called the Virtual College of Texas. Why did Governor Perry issue such a big challenge? Because, as management expert Robert Waterman Jr. put it, the best teams seem to be driven by big ideas and targets that seem impossible. Big targets create a sense of adventure that attracts the best people in the organization, end quote. The governor wants to tap the creative genius of our best institutional and business leaders. He wants them to think beyond the local campus, beyond the printed textbook, and most importantly, beyond what is currently possible. He wants them to help make Texas a world leader in higher education, and he is confident they will succeed. Thank you for your interest in this important topic, and I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Thank you, David. Members, questions for Mr. Young? Commissioner?
Well, David, we've talked about this. I recall, I think it was about 10 years ago, that a scientist at MIT came up with the idea that we should develop a computer in the range of the cost in the range of $100 so that it would be accessible to poor children all over the developing world. And people scoffed at the idea. I think at that time the typical notebook computer cost $1,500, $1,600, only 10 years ago. And the last time I was in Best Buy, I saw a netbook computer selling in the range of $250. I think it is an appropriate challenge for Texas. We know that approximately 50% of the youngsters coming through the K-12 pipeline qualify for Title I benefits, which means are poor, and which means they simply will be left out if the costs of higher education continue to spiral as they have over the past 20 years. And to a large extent, those young people are the future of Texas. I think it's urgent that we find low-cost alternatives, as you pointed out, and it's important for institutional leaders as well as the general public to know this. We're not talking about every field. We're not talking about every baccalaureate degree. We're not talking about every student. We're talking about making sure that we have a range of options for young people so that they can pick the path to a baccalaureate degree that makes the most sense for them. And creating this low-cost alternative is precisely what we need to do, and I think that we in Texas should embrace the challenge and become a national leader in this area.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think that is the key to this, is we're not wanting to limit options. We're wanting to expand options to allow more students to get a bachelor's degree.
Commissioner, what type of 10,000 degrees are we looking at? I mean, some examples?
Well, I think we're going to have a presentation on that in just a couple of minutes.
All right.
Let's turn it over to David, who will introduce the next.
Thank you. As we were reviewing what we were going to do at this Thank you. As we were reviewing how we were going to approach discussing this topic, we realized that Van Davis on our staff has really been working with many elements of that we think are probably going to be required if we're going to achieve something like a $10,000 baccalaureate degree. So Van, if you'd come forward. Van has been working with elements of online education, distance education, course redesign, blended courses, just a whole range of options that are really important. And when we discussed this topic in preparing for the meeting, pointed out a number of areas in which there are elements of this in place in Texas already, and it's a matter of seeing if we can bring them together in meaningful kind of ways, and at the same time pursue some of that innovation that David was talking about earlier. And so if Van has a presentation for you, and I would encourage you to ask questions as we go through, if that's all right, Van.
Certainly.
And I don't see if you have it, but Van also has prepared a two-page summary for you that if it hasn't been handed out to you, we should get to you before the meeting's over.
Yeah, we've got this at our
Okay,
places.
good. Van?
Good morning. As you've heard Mr. Young and the Commissioner talk about, we have a very bold and somewhat audacious goal before us that the Governor has put together for us. What we want to do this morning is lay out what we think some of the critical elements of a $10,000 bachelor degree would be, as well as lay out what we think the framework is that we would like to use to drive the discussions from here on out. There's a couple of caveats I want to put on the table, though, and I believe you've probably already heard these, but it's worth stating them again. The first one, and this is, I think, absolutely the most important one that we feel should be out there, is that low cost does not equate to low rigor or even low value. And that cannot be overemphasized. We want to create more options for our Texas citizens and students. That does not mean, though, that we want to create anything that is any less of the high quality that already exists at our institutions. And the second thing, and you've heard both Mr. Young and the Commissioner say this, is that this is not going to be the right degree for every student. But we want to expand the options. We're not talking about replacing anything, but we want to expand the options that our students have to get the education that they need to be successful, to make their families successful, to make this state more successful, and to close the gaps in higher education that we still face. So with that in mind, just in case you haven't seen the quote enough already, we have the challenge that Governor Perry laid out in the State of the State address, that it's time for a bold Texas-style solution to this challenge that I'm sure the brightest minds in our universities can devise. Today, I'm challenging our institutions of higher education to develop bachelor's degrees that cost no more than $10,000, including textbooks. This morning, what we want to do is begin the conversation about this challenge, and that means looking at some of the skepticism that's been expressed, examining what some of our institutions are already doing to meet this challenge, and lay out the framework from which we can begin to find ways to make higher education and the benefits that it provides even more accessible to all Texans. We should start, though, by acknowledging that there are concerns and skepticisms that some have expressed about the practicality and the quality of a $10,000 baccalaureate degree. Texas higher education, as the Commissioner has referenced, is in a very similar place as computer hardware development was in 2005 when Nicholas Negroponte announced the development of his one laptop per child program. Negroponte's audacious goal at the time was to create a $100 laptop that could be given to every child in the world, making technology available to even the poorest, most remote children, and thus open up their worlds to infinite possibilities. At that time, critics argued that nothing that cheap could ever be sturdy enough to withstand the rigors of children. Those same critics argued that the traditional model of hardware development was the best one, and that the more bells and whistles a machine had, the better it was. We know now, though, that we find ourselves in the age of low-cost laptops and netbooks. We've come a far way. innovation. Audacious goals drive innovation. We see some similar skepticisms right now about the possibility of a $10,000 bachelor's degree. We have some that are afraid that such a degree would strip away the essence of a baccalaureate education. This concern, though understandable, presupposes a one-size-fits-all model of higher education. We know from research and experiences as educators that different students have different educational needs. While one student may desire and thrive on the social learning experiences that living on campus affords, other students may wish to focus exclusively on completing an academic degree and moving into their career. Another myth that continues to circulate is that the amount of money spent on an education is directly proportional to the quality of the education. This effect was recently dubbed in an NPR news segment as the Chivas-Regal effect. And it assumes that parents and students alike believe that the higher the tuition and fee costs of the education, the better it must be. We have institutions, though, that have begun to counter this effect. For example, the University of the South at Sewanee, which is a highly selective, highly expensive institution, recently announced a 10% reduction in its tuition and fee costs. Doesn't mean that there's going to be a 10% reduction in the quality of a Sewanee degree. But what they realized was that by lowering the tuition costs, they could actually save money in the long run. This is especially the case at institutions where there's strong reliance on merit financial aid. Lower tuition costs means a lower need for financial aid. It also means a lower debt burden on students and families. Just as there's no single type of learner, there will never be any single type of degree. There are multiple ways that our college costs can be lowered and that institutions here in Texas are using. And we anticipate that in that spirit there will be many different ways that a $10,000 bachelor's degree can be constructed. We do think, though, that there are going to be some common critical elements to any $10,000 bachelor's degree. The first, and I've said it before, is that low cost does not equate to low rigor. For any degree to be valuable, whether it's a $10,000 bachelor's degree or not, students and employers must have faith that graduates possess the key competencies and skills that allow them to step into the workplace and pursue graduate study. And a $10,000 bachelor's degree is no exception. Rigor must always be central, and faculty will play a crucial role in establishing and assuring that rigor. Second, these degrees will not be for every student, but there are Texans that will want them. We have parents who are trying to balance work and family and don't have time to go to a campus and sit in a classroom. We have sons and daughters that are taking on the responsibilities of caring for parents and siblings. We have working students that have already begun careers and have now realized that if they want to advance in those careers, they must have a bachelor's degree. We even may have traditionally aged students who are self-starters and highly motivated and want to advance through their degree as quickly as possible and enter the workforce. All of these are potential audiences for this degree. The other thing that's important to note is that these degrees will not be the traditional ones merely placed online. We can't do what we've always done and stick it online. They will be highly structured, and they'll be targeted with a very focused curriculum. The core curriculum will probably be more prescriptive in an effort to improve student retention and performance and to decrease the number of non-essential courses that students take. And tuition and fee structures will have to be rethought so that online students are not being charged to support facilities and programs that they will never access. And many of our institutions are already doing this. It's worth noting that these critical elements for success and the framework that I'm about to lay out this morning echo a number of the pieces in the Coordinating Board's Cost Efficiencies Report. For example, the section on creating clear pathways for successful student outcomes suggests that one of the ways to increase student success and efficiency of delivery is to include programs with fewer options. So what we're presenting this morning is a preliminary framework. This is a starting point for a much larger discussion that we would like to facilitate. This discussion and its subsequent degrees must take into the account of multiple stakeholders in the state: faculty, students, and Texas business. and faculty must be at the center of the curriculum development. They must be at the center of the delivery methods, and they must be at the center at creating and choosing learning materials. We know that we have the innovators and the educators to lead those conversations and build upon what they're already doing. The first piece of our framework is that we need to look at how we can leverage our existing efforts. The average tuition and fees in fiscal year 2020, not including books, at a Texas public university was almost $6,500 per 30 semester credit hour, and that comes to not quite $26,000 for a 120 semester credit hour baccalaureate degree. During that same time, the lowest tuition and fees at a 4-year public university in Texas was at Texas A&M Texarkana, where we're looking at a little over $4,500 per 30 semester credit hours for a total of just a little over $18,000 for a 120 semester credit hour degree. Community college tuition and fees are lower, though, than that is found at Texas public universities. And students who complete their first 2 years at a community college and then transfer to a university to complete a bachelor's degree can realize significant savings. Such 2+2 programs, though, will only work if a student is able to transfer all of the credits that is earned at the community college into the baccalaureate program and not be forced to take extraneous courses. Careful advising, articulation agreements, and close cooperation between university, community college, and students are all necessary for the most benefit to be realized from our current 2+2 agreements and any future ones. We also have examples of how technology can be used to leverage course availability, which the Virtual College of Texas, VCT, is an excellent example of this. This is a collaborative of Texas community and technical colleges administered through the Texas Association of Community Colleges. VCT uses what they call the host provider model. A student is enrolled at their home campus, their host campus, and they take instruction actually from a provider campus. That way, a student is able to be enrolled at their home institution, but they still have access to the courses that they need to be able to finish their degrees or their certificates or credentials in a timely fashion. It allows us to leverage the courses that are already out there and allows institutions to not have to recreate the wheel. 2+2 agreements and collaborative arrangements like VCT also speak directly to our cost efficiency reports, creating clear pathways for successful student outcomes, as well as the reports section on meeting demand with new approaches to delivery.
Van?
Yes, sir.
Just a question while you're on that cost slide. Do we have any data that I'm sure the range is quite a bit, but do we have any data on what the average cost burden that textbooks per year represent?
We don't have any state data yet. We can look at some national data and get an idea of the range, and we'll address the textbook issue in a moment. Obviously, though, when we figure in textbooks, we see these numbers are tuition and fees without textbooks included.
Right.
So when we figure in textbooks, we do see a significant increase.
I mean, it would be at least a fair guess that that students spend $1,000 a year in the current textbook model.
For some majors, yes. It's going to vary by major, and it varies by how they deliver it.
Yeah, Eric, why don't
But
you
yeah.
chime in here?
That's, I'd say probably around $1,000 for at least a business degree.
For a
per
business
year.
degree? Yeah, per year or per semester?
Probably per year, but I've had some semesters I've spent before $350 to $400 on one textbook. So.
I have a son getting a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and those art textbooks.
Are very expensive.
Don't have any electronic versions of those yet, but anyway.
And we'll address that in a moment.
Yeah, Mr. Ryder?
Man, also on VCT, because, I mean, Virtual College of Texas has been around. How long has the platform been here?
I can't remember when they started, but it's been close to a decade at least, I believe.
And if you look at it, how successful has it been in terms of how many students we pushed through? Because if I remember right, this is probably 2 years ago, I got involved in this where we were looking at Virtual College of Texas, and I think one of the impediments, if I remember, was how you can get a course even qualified to be allowed to be on VCT. And there was, to me, an extremely onerous process to go through that. And at least 2 or 3 years ago, I remember that some institutions were swung away just because it was so difficult. Is that still the case today? Or,
I don't
mean, because
have-
it's a good model, but the question is, how big are the impediments to VCT right now?
I don't have the number in front of me of the number of institutions that are participating, but it's still a significant number that participate as providers and an even larger number whose students participate in it. There are no doubt ways that process could be streamlined. What I think is interesting is that we see the Texas A&M University system now has looked at VCT and is actually about to pilot this summer a very small version of that with a handful of the A&M system institutions looking at how they can use that host provider method. So there are probably ways in which that can be made more efficient if it's to be scaled up, but we do know that it is working. And Ron Thomas, who is the director of it, would be able to easily provide us with that data, and I can pass it on to you guys.
Yeah, I'd really like to, I hear it's working, but I'd like to see the numbers. I'd like to see really how many students this is impacting.
And how many credit hours?
How many credit hours are being driven through VCT? Because I've always thought we've got a platform there, but we've never effectively utilized that platform, at least 2 or 3 years ago.
I'm guessing that Ron is actually probably watching this, and I'm guessing I can probably get that data to you. If not by the end of today, then by tomorrow.
Okay. Mr. Ryder, I believe part of the issue you were talking about was related to dual credit and a separate system being developed by TEA, and it's not the Virtual College of Texas, but in fact, one of the concerns was the courses from the Virtual College of Texas were not being included.
Correct.
In that other system.
That's right.
So I believe that was the issue. But I think it's also important to note, as Van points out a number of existing efforts, part of what we've learned over time is some of the issues that you're bringing up, that there are some things that have to be addressed, and having this challenge, I think, gives the opportunity to look at some of these resources. How can they be better utilized or at all moving forward? One of the real advantages of Virtual College of Texas, I've understood, is actually providing courses to students at a community college in which that course isn't available.
Exactly.
And that's been its primary emphasis in previous years, and it may be time to expand it beyond that, and it's at least something we should look at. And I know the Cost Efficiency Committee pointed out in particular that's at least a base we should consider going forward.
And we know now that all of a student could complete the general education core online through VCT courses at this point, and could actually, under some scenarios, maybe even complete a general general Associate of Arts or an Associate of Science. But we can easily get you that data.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. Are all of these, what you just mentioned, are all those transferable?
Actually, they're transcripted by the host institution. That's the thing that's unique about the VCT model, is that they're not transfer courses. A student is at their host institution. They're at the community college that they're enrolled in, and they actually pay their tuition and fees to that community college. But they are enrolled in a course that's being offered by the provider institution. As far as the student's transcript is concerned, it's transcripted by their institution, not as transfer credit, but it shows up just like any other course that the student has taken at their home institution. The host institution then pays an instructional fee to the provider institution. But as far as the student's concerned, there's no difference between them taking that course through a VCT provider than taking that course at their own institution. And transfer of credit is not an issue at that point.
Okay, but then those credits will transfer to a 4-year institution?
Correct.
Okay.
I'd like to make a comment on that. I've seen this to be a real value, particularly to the smaller community colleges that can't offer certain courses. I can give you a clear example of that. At Panola College, we can't offer physics. We just don't have the demand. So we partnership with Kilgore College, who does have a physics instructor, and our students can take those classes on campus at Panola College. It is transcripted through Panola College, and it enables us to reduce our costs because we don't have to hire or attempt to hire a faculty member to teach a small class. And I don't know what kind of role it plays in larger institutions and community college systems, but it certainly, I've seen firsthand of what it really can do for those smaller schools.
Actually related to that, I just read last night that in Pennsylvania, the Penn State system is examining the use of online courses to do a similar thing at the universities. So they, in this case, provide Arabic language instruction at all the institutions across the state in a way that they simply could not afford to otherwise. And of course, there's some thought about whether that's the best medium to deliver that instruction. So we'll see what happens. But they're realizing that there's some things that you would like available at very small institutions, and language is typically problematic for small institutions to provide a full range of courses. And so it's a similar model being employed in a different state with a specific desire to expand access to certain types of courses, but for students within a more traditional academic environment.
Well, Van, we'll let you get through your last 5 slides, we promise.
Okay. Not a problem. One of the other pieces of the framework that we're putting forward today is that we also need to take advantage of technology, and I think we've already gone a ways into talking about how that can be done. We know, and this is really what we've been talking about, that one of the cost inefficiencies that can sometimes be found in higher education is a duplication of efforts. And when each institution is developing its own degree programs and courses, and that's being duplicated by a variety of similar degree programs and courses at institutions. But we think that rather than initially focusing on trying to get 10% of each institution's degree programs to cost less than $10,000, the state could solicit proposals from institutions to develop and offer a $10,000 degree online in certain fields to the entire state. By providing an institution with the opportunity for a period of time to draw upon a statewide net market, duplication of efforts can be minimized, costs associated with the creation of duplicated degree programs will be minimized, and subsequent savings can be passed on to students in the state. In addition, institutions could consider using technology to deconstruct the different aspects of learning. For example, assessment responsibilities, especially in large lower division courses, could be assumed by dedicated graders who are appropriately credentialed in the field, using rubrics and criteria developed by faculty of record and supervised by someone with specialized experience in student evaluation and assessment. This would thus free up faculty time for other duties. Again, the development of innovative teaching through leveraging technology and developing alternative delivery systems is also referenced in the cost efficiency report in the creating clear pathways for successful student outcomes. And again, we already have Texas institutions that are doing this. We have institutions that are using the distributive grading method right now in entry-level English composition courses with some success. We also believe that we need, as another part of this framework, to seriously discuss how we develop degree programs with multiple pathways. We all know that students are unique. They enter a degree program with unique needs and with a unique blend of experience and knowledge. For those students who enter a program with knowledge to fulfill some student learning outcomes, especially in our lower division general education courses, there should be ample opportunities to prove their mastery and receive credit. An important part of being able to do this is to develop general education courses that revolve around competencies with several ways for students to show mastery, including international baccalaureates, CLEP exams, AP exams, institutional exams, prior learning assessment where appropriate, and even industry assessment such as industry certifications where appropriate. By also adding different course options such as a standard semester, 6 weeks accelerated semesters, and even self-paced asynchronous courses, students will have opportunities to enroll throughout the academic year and choose a degree delivery method that is best going to meet their needs and also their learning styles. Technology provides us with extraordinary opportunities to tailor instruction to students. When instruction to students can be tailored to their needs and to their learning styles, we see greater likelihood of student retention and student success. And that means a cost savings to the students, and it also means a cost savings to the state. And again, these are things that we identified in the cost efficiency report in the Creating Clear Pathways for Successful Student Outcomes section. We also believe we have to look at how to integrate the best materials, and this begins to speak to concerns about textbook costs. We have a number of high-quality open-source materials that are available right now, created by top institutions such as Harvard, MIT, UCLA. There's no reason that videos of classroom lectures, special lectures, experiments can't easily be incorporated into online courses as either required or optional materials. Open-source textbooks, such as those found in the award-winning Connections repository at Rice, can be incorporated as alternatives to textbooks after faculty have reviewed them and further reduce textbook costs. Not only do we see the potential in the reduction of course material costs by doing this, but it also means that we are showcasing the best resources and thinking from around the world for our students and broadening and expanding the classroom horizon for them. And finally, the last piece of the framework that we're putting forward today is to look at how to provide dynamic student support services. Student retention and satisfactory academic progress are absolutely crucial and essential elements in reducing the cost of a degree to, again, both students and the state. In order to graduate in a timely manner without the need to take extraneous coursework, students have to receive consistent and informed advising. And advisors can do more than just help students select courses, and good advisors are already doing more than just helping students select courses. But advisors can take on the role of coaches, and they can help students determine where they are likely to encounter difficulty. They can identify the resources for those students and then connect students to resources. And this can be especially crucial in an online learning environment where students are not encountering faculty and other students face-to-face. And technology here holds some interesting possibilities. Social networking tools can be adapted to help build community amongst students and courses, and we're seeing that happen already. I was on a site visit to an institution to review a doctoral program last year, and they had some current graduate students that were speaking with us and the consultants. And these were students who were in an online graduate degree program in that college. And halfway through the interview, it came out that most of them had never met each other before that day, face to face. We would never have known that if they hadn't said it. It looked like they had been sitting in a classroom with each other for a year. They knew each other well. They were communicating with each other constantly through Twitter, through texting, through email, through discussion boards. They just had never actually been in the same room together. But it had not impacted their sense of community in any way whatsoever. So we have tools that we can leverage to help create and build community, which is also so important for student retention and success. We have tools that instructors and advisors can use, like Twitters and texting, that they can use to instantly connect to students and share important information. And we even have programs that we can look at, like the one being piloted at Austin Peay State University in Tennessee, which is being called sort of a Netflix for advising. And what this one is doing is it's a program that's used to recommend courses to students, but it also evaluates their readiness based upon past academic performances and based upon the performance of other students with similar academic characteristics in that course, so that students have an idea before they even walk into the classroom where they're likely to begin to encounter difficulties, so that students and advisors can both be proactive in addressing those rather than reactive. Also, we should look at incorporating on-demand student learning resources, such as just-in-time online tutoring, or even the development of face-to-face learning support centers that online students can drop into for assistance on an as-needed basis. And again, these are things that in many institutions here in the state are already being done. And that's the amazing thing about this, is our institutions are already doing so many pieces of this. What we're looking at is how do we put those pieces together in a different way. We know, though, that as we move forward, any successful degree, again, we believe will have these common characteristics. They have to be rigorous. They have to be targeted. They have to be structured. They have to be competency-based. They have to leverage technology. They absolutely have to include multiple pathways to degrees, and they have to have faculty buy-in. We know that we have innovative faculty and administrators and institutions that are ready to meet this challenge and are already doing much of this. What the coordinating board is happy to do from here on is to put this framework forward and to facilitate that discussion so that we can begin to meet this bold challenge, and ultimately so that we can increase access and affect the lives of more Texans.
Thank you, Van. That's a great presentation. What do you think our timeline is? And it may obviously be a different timeline for each of the three basic models that you present, but I think in addition to establishing the ambitious goal that the governor laid out, it also helps to set a timeline like President Kennedy did when he said we'll have a man on the moon by the end of the decade. So what do you think in terms of months, years, et cetera?
Well, we're already looking at 2+2 agreements. We saw this with the Mechanical Engineering Compact. We're seeing this with other compacts that we may be looking at doing. You all know that we have some legislation. Representative Branch's legislation right now also references this. So, you know, the expanded 2+2 agreements is something that we're already working on and can continue to work on. And we already have many of those arrangements in place. So I think that we will continue to see an expansion of those in the next 1 to 2 years. When we talk about scalable online programs that are achieving economies of scale, again, we have some of the pieces in place here. You know, I'm an old historian. I'm an old 20th century historian, and I get really nervous whenever you talk about President Kennedy and the Man on the Moon challenge, because I remember what people thought about that challenge when he made it. I think that what we are looking at doing is finding our institutions that are interested in looking at these and bringing them together in the next few months to 6 months, and then beginning to look at ways that we can expand upon what's already being done. So in terms of the scalable online programs, I think we're looking at, again, expanding what we're already doing 1, 2, 3 years. And I would be more than happy for the commissioner or Dr. Gardner to suggest what their timeline is, because it's their timeline that actually drives my timeline.
You ready for them to bail you out here? Is that what you're saying?
Their timeline drives my timeline.
Commissioner?
Well, my goal is to have some very concrete proposals and at least some coordinated coursework in place before the next session begins.
I'd like to underline part of what Van mentioned in terms of institutions that are interested. We know that everyone won't be. We'd like to identify really the faculty that are interested in this kind of approach, the institutions that are, and bring them to the table. The institutions that already have an interest, who have been pursuing some of these things, and see how we can work together. I think that's our quickest route. Initially, I think there will be people who see the opportunity. That was really our approach with our transfer compacts, and we found it very helpful. We found that when we got administrators and faculty to the table, they actually put additional things on the table that we had not, which really made the difference in what we were doing. And so we haven't contacted anyone. No one's contacted us at this point, but we're hoping that providing this framework, that it will draw some people forward who say, we see some things we can do, and we'd really like to talk to you about that. And they may have additional ideas that may be more beneficial than what we put on the table today.
Commissioner?
We'll identify people around the country that are working on this issue. We'll bring them in. We'll identify some institutions and administrators and faculty inside Texas who are interested in working on this issue and move very quickly. The one thing that Van didn't mention that I think it is important, will be an important component of a low-cost, high-quality degree is paid internships for which students get academic credit. We've already started talking with the Texas Retailers Association about students working in business environments and actually having academic activities connected with their actual job experience. That will certainly help reduce the cost of degrees. We can do that in fields like engineering. We can do it in fields like retail. We could do it in teaching. There are a lot of different ways that we can give students academic credit or tie courses to real-life experience. We can use work-study money to pay these students, so that would reduce the cost of a degree substantially. And we need to look more closely at giving students academic credit for important work experience that's relevant. For example, if you're trying to get a baccalaureate degree in nursing and you've been a medic in Iraq or Afghanistan, then that should count towards the degree requirements. We'll look at opportunities and options such as those as well.
And Commissioner, this is maybe a question for you. In Van's summary here, there was one point under your technology point which talked about allowing institutions to compete for the right to deliver statewide degree programs in maybe high demand fields. I guess my question is, if we were to see that materialize, how does the formula funding fit into that? I mean, if you have an institution that wins, to create, a bachelor in some certain field, then again, I'm thinking from an institutional hat too. For the institutions, what does that mean for funding? Because do they get that same formula funding for that online course as they do a live course? They do, because it's the same per semester funding hour, I assume.
Well, we might have to look at different funding mechanisms for these blended degrees, these hybrid degrees. Obviously, if you're not asking students to pay for the cost of bricks and mortar and other things associated with degrees that you're essentially taking off campus, we might apply the same principle to formula funding for institutions and come up with a method that's different.
The formula committees will be addressing that. They've already started to work the space model to really understand better the difference in cost between delivering online courses versus campus courses. And the model, as it now exists, really treats online students that never step on the campus the same way in calculating the amount of square footage required on campus. So that's related, but it's not an identical issue. I think part of what Van was talking about is we know that when you offer 35 online programs in one area, that you achieve few economies of scale, and most schools really haven't achieved any cost savings by virtue of delivering online courses. But if there's some key areas if we're developing a $10,000 degree in which it would make sense for an institution or two or three to work together perhaps in delivering the course, not only do you actually have the opportunity to achieve some savings because of scale, but you also have the opportunity to improve the quality of online because you can do more in the development of those online courses than you can doing it institution, professor by professor. And so that's one reason that's on the table. It's not a hard and fast, but it's something that we felt we needed to consider in terms of reducing costs and improving the quality at the same time. And we haven't directly addressed your question in terms of how would the formula flow from that. But I should say that our assumption at this point with all these models is what would change is the cost of tuition fees, and that the formula dollars, at least at this point, we're assuming would flow the same way that they do now. If we do the concentrated online, it might be somewhat different.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we may need to think in terms of incentives, particularly in the initial launching stages, so to speak, as well, because I think there was a misperception that by some institutions that this somehow represented an artificial pushing down of their cost and therefore their revenue, as opposed to innovative, approach to delivering a degree in a completely different way.
Well, that was my concern is, do you create almost a disincentive from that same perspective? And we just got to make sure we're addressing that simultaneously.
That'll be especially important when we look at competency-based ways for students to achieve credit. One of the ironies is that the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning released a study last year that showed that for returning adults that had access to prior learning assessment as a way of bringing in credit, that their retention and graduation actually increased. At the same time, though, under a formula funding model, those would be hours that an institution might not receive funding for.
On the other hand, if our outcomes-based funding recommendations are adopted and mature, then a portion of the formula funding will be distributed based on outcomes, and that would be part of the incentive to look at how do we get people through the pipeline in a efficient but quality manner.
Yeah, part of it is, do we need incentives for institutions to use AP and CLEP and competency-based where it's appropriate? Because in the current formula system, there's absolutely no flow of dollars from that. So one thing one would have to think about, should there at least be some advantage to a school doing that when they think it still maintains quality, rather than knowing there'll be 30 hours. And with some students that will move towards the degree, but it's acknowledged in no way by the state funding system that that's reducing costs, and there's no incentive for them to do that.
I have some question for the Commissioner and Dr. Gardner. Have you done any studies? What percentage of the institutions have online e-books or electronic books, and how many of them have dean or associate dean of online education? Can you please set some goal that in the state of Texas, most of the institutions of higher learning, maybe 30% will have dean or associate dean of online education, and maybe 30% of the books will be e-books, online books, so that students don't have to buy the books. Can we try to work on some goal like that?
Yeah, I think part of what Van was addressing, he may want to address in more detail, is that we do think we ought to work with institutions like Rice, who have been addressing the e-book aspect, to see if we can more actively support them and faculty members in terms of using that medium to a greater extent. And there is, of course, there are incentives from the textbook industry for faculty to develop textbooks for them, and if we could find some way to have incentives to develop the e-books and work with those in a more meaningful kind of way. In terms of art history, the Commissioner was pointing out, the quality of preparing, having the artwork online is much higher than it's ever been. And in fact, there's always been a problem really in terms of good reproductions in textbooks. So we think that's an area that's actually ripe for development that best we can tell hasn't been fully developed yet. But there are much of that's available online at institutions.
We don't have we don't have a number of how many of our institutions or even how many faculty within institutions are using ebooks. We do have a study that the University of Texas did last year on the use of ebooks. But that wasn't a statewide study. That was, and it wasn't even an entire institution study. The challenge, I think, for faculty, and I'm saying this from the 10 years I was a faculty member, is that when you're teaching a 4-4 load a semester, it's hard to have the time between grading and community responsibilities and office hours and classroom time to find the online learning resources that are really of high quality. it's also, at least whenever I was teaching, I would have textbook representatives come into my office all the time, handing me the newest textbook. And I tried to be very mindful of the cost of textbooks because I was at an institution where many of my students couldn't afford textbooks. But unless I took 30 or 40 hours to do a line-by-line comparison of the new edition and the old edition, I would have no way of knowing what had been changed. So that's the other, I think, challenge that sometimes our faculty run into is they don't always have the time to go out and find the online resources because they're not accumulated into one place. Although we're talking about some ways to try to deal with that and at least get a good start for folks with our Learning Objects repository that's being developed. But the other challenge is that faculty oftentimes have no way of doing a comparison to see what's changing in editions. And I was a history professor. I doubt that there were a lot of things that changed sometimes in between editions of general U.S. history textbooks.
Let me respond to your question another way. We know that some campuses provide assistance to faculty to develop online courses to use technology more effectively. I visited UT Pan Am some months ago. I think I saw President Nelson in the audience. He could talk about this in greater length, but I believe that they have a center that provides support to faculty who want to create online courses or blended courses. I think that's going to become more common at campuses so that whether it's an associate dean or it's an office of learning and technology, institutions are taking a look at how they can expand different learning opportunities for students.
Some studies to look at how many institutions in Texas have online education dean or associate dean, and how many of these textbooks are e-books, what percentage, 5%, 10%, 20%, and this study may be helpful for other institutions who are not doing it.
We can take a look at that issue.
It also, this conversation begs another question, and that is, this is for Commissioner Yu or David or Van. Do we have a sense yet of, we have a lot of research on the efficacy of hybrid learning models with some online and some face-to-face learning opportunity. As we pursue the goal of a $10,000 bachelor's degree, do we have a sense of what percentage of those credit hours would be delivered online or through other untraditional methods versus in a more traditional or face-to-face sense?
I don't think we know at this point. I think we can imagine everything from 2 years on a community college campus and 2 years of university work that includes blended courses as well as online courses. Certainly we're going to look at degrees that are offered almost entirely online. There were some of us who met several months ago with representatives of DeVry University, and they had a model that I thought was intriguing. They offer courses that are entirely online, but they have tutoring centers placed in cities around the country where they have a lot of students, so that all students take the courses entirely online. If they hit a roadblock and they somehow can't seem to master the material online, they have access to these tutoring centers where they can go on a need basis and get some direct face-to-face help. That's another model that we probably will take a look at. It's relatively low cost because it might only be 1 or 2 times during the completion of a course that students will need that kind of face-to-face tutoring beyond the tutoring and the other academic support that's available online. So the technology is changing so quickly. A lot of assumptions we're making right now will be different when we implement the program.
Another aspect of their model that's quite different than that is just the search for unused resources. And one example is in nursing, and they found that a clinical resource that was available at UT Arlington had some capacity that they were able to work with UT Arlington and use some of that capacity for their nursing students in a way that both helped them but also helped UT Arlington more fully utilize their resources. So part of this is we may also identify resources in parts of the state that, because of demographics in the area, because of various changes in the demand for programs, we might be able to bring resources together and more fully utilize, in some cases, resources that are there that are very good, but the students just don't happen to be in that part of the state at the time, but help keep those folks in place and ratchet it up for them.
And lastly, it strikes me that one of our biggest challenges in pursuing this goal is the skepticism that was immediately all over the audience when the governor announced this challenge. I was in the chamber on the day of the State of the State address, and there was no question that the one goal that the governor outlined, this $10,000 bachelor degree, got the most comment and feedback after his speech. I had one system head and two state representatives immediately go, "How can you possibly do a $10,000 degree?" And I think we're challenged by the ability to think outside the box, to use the old cliche. And it strikes me that in an arena where innovation and the generation of new ideas is the currency, and I'm talking about higher education, not necessarily the legislature, but where people are used to thinking very innovatively, that there's so much skepticism which we need to overcome. So, David, I would ask you, what can we do to help overcome that aspect of the challenge to creating the $10,000 degree?
Well, I think this is a great start. I think Dr. Davis has presented some great ideas in showing that there are some things that we can do to make this possible. I think it's also important to keep in mind that this is a challenge. If we don't hit the $10,000 degree, that dollar figure right on the mark, at least we can make some progress. So I think if you can just continue to provide open dialogue and leadership through your staff and provide resources for institutions that are interested and just help us keep the momentum going, I think those are all important and will be a big help, and we certainly appreciate y'all's expertise and your wisdom and your help on this initiative.
Commissioner?
Well, the whole purpose of Van's presentation was to point out that it's entirely feasible, and that we already have a lot of the building blocks in place. We already have a lot of interest in this issue, and I think that based on the discussion this morning, that the idea will not seem quite so outlandish as it might have originally. It's something that we are going to pursue aggressively. I already talked to Van about heading up the agency's efforts in this regard, and we're going to move aggressively.
Harold?
I'd just like to ask Eric, have you had online classes?
I've had one online class. I've had several classes that have been joint, a little bit online, plus in-class discussion.
And from a student's perspective, how would you rate that
It's
compared to traditional?
different. I mean, done right, it can be an amazing system. I'd also say, as far as like online tutoring, we have Smart Thinking at my university. I saw a student Friday at 10 p.m. get linked up with a microbiology tutor to help him study for a microbiology exam. He did quite well, and so there's an opportunity there as well. But done right, there's some definite opportunity there, especially for saving costs. As far as like online textbooks, classes where textbooks do change, income tax, where the laws will take a 180 at least once or twice. I mean, throughout the semester, no, but I mean, there's a definite opportunity there to go online and probably save some money because those textbooks can be relatively expensive.
Mm-hmm. Good example.
What percentage of your textbooks were online or e-textbook?
I've had two. In
Out
my,
of?
Out of my entire college career, I've had two.
Only two.
Only two.
If you can set a goal of 30% in next 2 years, that will be a good goal to set.
Yeah, we don't control that, though. That's depends on the market.
And I'll say that there was pretty much no difference between the online textbook and having the actual textbook that you go and purchase from the bookstore. It was a very well written, the program, the way it was set up. So.
Durga, you might remember that also last year that the student regents from different campuses comprised a subcommittee, if you will, of the cost efficiency effort, specifically looking at e-textbooks, and their findings were that technology and features were moving so rapidly that while we weren't quite there yet, they felt that within 2 years the product to completely change that textbook landscape would be on the market. So hopefully before the 2013 session we'll see the marketplace bring a lot of new solutions in that area as well. Members, any further comments? Or David?
Well, related to that, the commissioners asked that we have a conference in the fall. It will come just before the Regents conference we already have, and we'll transition from one to the other, focusing on teaching and learning. And one thing that will be heavily used is the technology that we're talking about in that conference itself for the presenters, to show how some of these things can be used, including people from our institutions demonstrating what they've learned in terms of where it's well used, where it's not as well used, and so aside from the $10,000 degree, that there are a lot of these things that are related and come together, and part of the challenge is to make sure that we help bring some of these things together, and that so much is happening that even in terms of the online materials, there's so much available online, but they're not really well brought together, at least in my view, in a good way, so that a student or a faculty member could go in and say, okay, where are these best 12 examples of something I could use? They're scattered all over the internet. They do exist, and that's something I think we need to think about in the long term. Is there some way to bring those together, to get those peer reviewed by faculty in the state and make it accessible, which is provides an additional means of tutoring for the student that they can have access to at no cost whatsoever.
And I think we can leverage some of our existing projects to do some of these things. We should see the launch, at least the soft launch in the fall, of the Texas Learning Objects Repository, which not only will have a digital collection of online materials and hybrid materials that have been developed through the Texas Course Redesign Project, but also we could look at expanding that to include some of the things that David's talking about. We'll probably have our online professional development modules will be housed there as well. So I think that there's a number of things that we've started to do that perhaps when we were planning them a year or two ago, they looked a little bit different. But because the landscape has changed so rapidly, there are ways that we can adapt them for these new challenges as well.
Well, Van, David, very much appreciate your comments and your time, and thank you for helping us explore this subject.
Thank you.
Next is item 6. These items are for the Committee on Closing the Gaps, chaired by Harold Hahn. Harold?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As far as the chair's overview, a recent development is that HEB has agreed to step up as a partner in the Generation Texas campaign. And the first step in this process is that they will introduce the Generation Texas movement to their 76,000 employees with a focused partnership in support of Generation Texas Day coming up on May the 20th. The initial Gen Tex Day partnership will involve 50,000 of their front-end partners. Those that are visible to the consumers, cashiers, customer service, store management, etc. They will relax their dress code, company-wide that day and asked that everyone wear a college shirt instead of their HEB red shirt, as well as a customized Gentex Plus HEB button. This rollout will involve all 295 of their stores across Central, South Texas, San Antonio, Houston. The stores will also be using a series of messages and posters to introduce their employees to Generation Texas in advance of Gentex Day. And finally, HEB has agreed to work with Gentex and the coordinating board to develop and release this partnership news to the press. Their Excellence in Education Awards will be announced May 15, so they would like to announce this on the heels of that buzz just in time for Gentex Day on May 20th. This effort will greatly advance our work to deliver Generation Texas across the state, and I would like to thank Milkshake Media for their efforts in securing the HEB Corporation as a partner in the Gentex campaign.
That's exciting news.
Yeah, it is.
That's fantastic.
Great.
That's exactly what was envisioned when Gentex was dreamed up, that private partners like this would.
And HEB has stepped up big.
Yeah, they really have. So I would like to see at our next meeting that we have an appropriate resolution for recognizing HEB and thanking Mr. Charles Butt, and because after all, who doesn't want a resolution to hang on their wall? So we in whatever fashion we can, really need to recognize and appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to mention that we met with HEB Corporation representative, the Director of Marketing, not very long ago. So it did not take long for them to jump on board and to help us with this effort.
That's fantastic news.
All right. Agenda item 6B is an update on closing the gaps by 2015 on research. Kevin Lemoyne, is that correct, Kevin?
Yes, sir.
All right. Deputy Assistant Commissioner of Academic Affairs and Research will present this item. Kevin?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Hahn. I've been asked to give you a brief update, a brief overview on closing the gaps in research, focusing on national comparison data, how Texas is doing and moving towards the state's targets on research, some information on the main disciplines that receive research funding, and then some recent information on the National Research University Fund, one of the newest sources of research funding. As you know, research is among the 4 main goals of closing the gaps. The target that was set early on was to increase the level of federal science and engineering research funding to 6.5% of the obligations to higher education across the state. I want to define obligations for you as opposed to expenditures. Obligations represent the amounts of orders placed, contracts awarded, services received, and other similar transactions during a given period, regardless of when the funds are appropriated and when future payment of money is required. Thanks. This slide shows where Texas was in 2007 compared to 1998, when the coordinating board began to track this Closing the Gaps measure. In 1998, Texas was at 5.3% of the federal research and development obligations. In 2007, Texas was at 5.6%. There had been a 0.3% gain. The states that exceed that percentage of federal R&D obligations are also shown on the table. And I'd like to apologize to you now for not having more recent data. For national comparison purposes, we rely on the National Science Foundation. We spoke with a representative from that agency about a month ago, and they let us know that the next report will be coming out this summer.
Precisely when?
They said
Were they equivocating?
They said June.
June, okay.
Thanks.
Will that be 2009 data, Kevin?
It will be. The Closing the Gaps research goal serves to keep attention on the need for Texas to be competitive for federal research dollars and projects, because in fact, these research dollars can help to stimulate economic activity as well as advance knowledge. Looking at the trend line since 1998, you can see that Texas's share did go up in fiscal year 2001 as well as fiscal year 2003, when its share of federal obligations ranged from 5.8 to 6.1%. Since then, however, its share has held at around 5.6%. And when we get the most recent data from NSF, we'll get a better sense of whether or not Texas is moving towards the 2015 target. Moving on to research expenditures as opposed to obligations, this slide basically shows the most recent distribution by sources of funding for research expenditures in the state. For fiscal year 2010, federal funds supported just over half of the total research expenditures at Texas public institutions. State-funded programs supported 20% of the funded research. Institutional contributions and private sources made up the rest. And some of the state-funded programs are ones that this board administers, including the Norman Hackerman Advanced Research Program, the Texas Research Incentive Program, and the Research Development Fund. In fiscal year 2010, the life sciences, meaning biological sciences and medical sciences, totaled 53% of the research expenditures in Texas, more than half of the research and development in the state of Texas. Expenditures in biological sciences were $642 million last year. Medical science expenditures were $1.2 billion, and research expenditures related to engineering, the next largest, $5.7 million. This slide shows the increase in research expenditures at Texas public institutions. As you see, there's been a steady growth since 2000, enabling institutions to reach the $3 billion level, which is the Closing the Gaps 2015 target, 7 years earlier in FY 2008. And as an example of this pretty dramatic increase in expenditures, let's take fiscal year 2009. Research expenditures at Texas public institutions totaled $3.3 billion, and the next year, FY 2010, it totaled $3.5 billion. An increase. There's been an increase every single year, in fact. I'd also like to point out.
What was the dollar figure in 2000?
In 2000, the dollar figure in
Looks like it was around 1.5, 1.6.
It's about 1.6. That's correct.
So that's 1.9 billion growth in 10 years, and obviously well over 100%. Kind of begs the question of, are we using the right and best metrics in terms of how we view the growth of Texas research? Dollar growth, when you look at the share of federal obligations, the growth seems unimpressive. We haven't really moved our position. We're still sixth. And market share is important, but on the other hand, when you increase the amount of research happening in Texas by some 120%, that seems significant. So.
And if I'm not mistaken, the research expenditures actually represents not only the federal sources, but also the state and institutional and private sources.
Right. I think it's an important distinction.
You're saying a base and then a percentage increase over that base?
Well, I'm just saying that in Closing the Gaps, we originally put a lot of emphasis on the goal of 6.5% of federal obligations, and I think that's, in terms of our market share and being competitive with other states, that's still important. But I think, we sometimes focus on that as opposed to looking at the growth of all the research pie, including private dollars, state dollars, et cetera. So I think, this graph, particularly with dollars on it, is an important distinction.
Absolutely. And another thing I wanted to point out on this slide is that a large portion of the research expenditures at public institutions takes place at the health-related institutions, as you can see by the use of the colored bar. Next slide. Thanks. So In summary, Texas ranks 6th among the states in federal research and development obligations as of 2007. $3.5 billion in total research expenditures that includes not only federal sources, but also state, private, and institutional. The federal government supplies more than 1/2 of the academic R&D funds, and the top 3 fields, as I said, are medical science, biological sciences, and engineering. Now to move on to the National Research University Fund. One of the newest sources of research funding, which has yet to be tapped into, is the National Research University Fund, established by the legislature last session. This board adopted rules in January 2011 laying out the eligibility criteria for access to a distribution of the fund. Last month, the Commissioner approved the first report to the legislature on the 7 emerging research universities' eligibility. None of the 7 emerging research universities are currently eligible to receive distributions. The main criterion that has to be satisfied is the amount of restricted research expenditures. None of the institutions reported restricted research expenditures at or above the statutory threshold of $45 million during FY 08 and 09, which is the reporting period for this last report. Regarding the other criteria that you see on the slide, one institution, University of Houston, met 4 out of the 6 optional criteria during this reporting period. I spoke recently with the Texas Treasury Safekeeping Trust Company that works with the Comptroller's Office, and learned that the balance of the National Research University Fund as of February 28th was over $613 million, and the average rate of return since the inception of the program of the fund was over 10%. There are several bills filed right now that would determine the distribution methodology for any funds that would come out of the National Research University Fund. And at the committee meeting, I went through the details of each of those bills, and I'm not going to do that now. It looks like there's one bill that is moving forward, House Bill 1000, and I got word this morning that there was some heated debate about several elements of that bill, and Senator Zaffirini said this morning that she expects consensus to be reached within the next 7 days, or no bill related to the distribution methodology will go through. That concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Members, questions? I think we will probably want to come back to this topic in our next meeting once we do see what legislation passes, so we all understand what the rules of engagement will be on the NRUF, so to speak, and would also like to provide some effort into, given what's going on with the trend in the federal budget and the lag, the huge lag in data on federal obligations, how we can better use, if not more meaningful, at least more readily comparable, up-to-date metrics like, the growth in total research dollars versus other states. But, we see what Texas has done, but it would be interesting to see, like we do with federal obligations, how does that growth from 1.6 to 3.5 billion compare total research dollars to those other peer states as a means of measuring our closing the gaps progress. Let's see, let me get back on script here.
We'll definitely look into the availability of that data.
Appreciate it, Kevin. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
Members, since we're a little bit ahead of agenda, I would entertain a motion to take agenda items 8 and perhaps further agenda items out of order prior to our lunch and executive session.
We still have some stuff.
Oh, I'm jumping ahead of you. Sorry about that. Una mas, go ahead.
Okay. Agenda items 6C
You can be thinking about your motions, though.
through 6F are on the consent calendar. Agenda item 6G, consideration of adopting the committee's recommendation to the board relating to a request for proposals to select a vendor for statewide coordination of the Generation Texas Public Awareness Campaign in fiscal year 2012. Dr. Judy Laredo, Assistant Commissioner for P16 Initiatives, will present this item. Dr. Laredo.
Members of the board, if you recall, with our original funding of the College Access Challenge Grant, which was over 3 years ago, we first began the Generation Texas campaign, or our campaign at that time, to secure a vendor who would lead us in our statewide effort. Funding was granted under the College Access Challenge Grant. That grant is now almost at the very end. The amount of money that we put into that campaign was $5 million. The College Access Challenge Grant, the new one that we have, began this year, and with our funding ending and our need to continue our work with Generation Texas, we would like your permission to develop the RFP that we will let out in May, but will not finally approve until July, because the grant, the second year of a 5-year grant, would not be submitted until July the 2nd, with approval immediately there soon after, following from the federal government. But because it's a process to create the RFP, to take it through the channels of the agency, to let it out, and the process that follows thereafter, we need to start ahead of time before the official grant goes in July 2nd. So that's why we're coming to you with that component at this time.
Any questions?
Judy, will we have the results of the RFP, the submittals, and the recommendation by the June Closing the Gaps Committee?
It may be tentative at that point. We will definitely have it in July. It just depends on the speed
July
of the
board meeting?
process.
Okay.
Yes.
Judy, can you remind me, specifically, I guess this was Milkshake?
Yes, that was.
Okay. How much is the total amount that we expended with Milkshake?
It's $5 million is what we have awarded over this really 5-year period of where we are today. But in order to expend any more funds, we have to go out with an RFP.
And will the RFP, it's been a while since we looked at, but will it tie back to the rollout plan, Mr. Chairman, that we originally committed to? You know, I can't remember, South Texas, I mean, it's...
Yes, sir.
Those will be the parameters of the RFP.
We already have the regions, the areas that we've covered, and we will then expand throughout the state. But the other facet of this is that we are looking to tap into the P16 councils to continue this rollout, because every community is different. So we're empowering more individuals across the state to be able to roll out this effort with whoever is awarded this contract.
Thank you.
So specifically, I think what we initially did our pilots in Fort Worth and San Antonio, and then we identified, or I think Milkshake recommended 3 other
That is correct.
pilot
so
cities.
we will have 5 of
And
total.
so this will include the 3 new focus cities, so to speak?
We will be rolling 3 of those out. We'll have these 5 targeted with the current contract, and then we're expanding. We're going further across the entire state.
So this next RFP
Take
will
it.
allow us to go statewide?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, members?
And with the help of HEB Corporation, and I'm sure that there are probably other businesses that will follow, it will only just add impetus to what we're trying to do.
All right, if there's no further discussion, may I have a motion to adopt the committee's recommendation to the board relating to a request for proposal to select a vendor for statewide coordination of the Generation Texas Public Awareness Campaign for fiscal year 2012.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the Committee on Closing the Gaps items.
Thank you, Chairman Hahn. So now, the chair would entertain a motion to take our next agenda category items under Roman numeral 8, out of order and move to those next.
So moved.
Have a motion from Mr. Hahn, a second from Dennis, I think. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy, which is chaired by Lynn Phillips. Lynn is not able to be here with us today, so Vice Chairman Hahn, you're up again.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome.
I'll dispense with any particular overview and just get immediately to the business at hand. Item 8B is on the consent calendar. Agenda items C17 were approved by the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy at their March meeting. This is for information only, but does anyone have any questions about any of these?
I would just note that in the summary about the projects, both the board approval project on consent and the projects approved by the committee and the commissioner, that out of the over $1 billion in projects, approximately $743 million of those were reapprovals. So we're not actually adding projects at the pace of $1 billion per quarter, much as my industry would like us to do so. But there was quite a bit of volume in reapproval.
Any other questions on item C17? Item 8D is a report on facilities decisions made by the commissioner or assistant commissioner since the previous board meeting. Again, this is information only. Any questions, comments? If none, we'll move to the next item. Agenda item 80 is an update on the coordinating board's priorities for the 82nd Texas Legislature. Linda Battles, Associate Commissioner, will provide an update on the agency's legislative appropriations request. And is Dom here?
He's on his way.
Okay. Dominic Chavez, Senior Director for External Relations, will provide an update on pertinent legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Judy is handing out our supplemental agenda materials for you to help guide our discussion. I'll be providing a brief overview, mainly focusing on the Senate Finance Committee's actions this past week, last week, on our budget. And we'll go over the handout shortly. But I just want to give you a brief high-level overview of the House to remind you what the House did when they adopted their budget on April 4th. They had a total of $164.5 billion in all funds, which is a $23 billion or 12.3% reduction from current funding levels. In comparison, the Senate Finance Committee passed its bill out of committee last week at $176.5 billion in all funds, which represents an $11 billion decrease or a 5.9% reduction from the current funding levels. The Senate bill also includes a contingency rider that would use an additional $3 billion from the rainy day fund. And this is beyond the $3.1 billion that the House recently approved to close the budget gap in the current biennium. The Senate Finance Committee also did a lot of work in identifying non-tax revenue of $4.1 billion. To turn to the coordinating board's budget, I'd like to point to you the spreadsheet that you have before you. And this provides you with a side-by-side summary of the House enrolled version of the appropriations bill compared to the Senate Finance Committee's version. You'll see that we've put the 1011 base, which represents the 5% cut. It does not take into account the 2.5% cut in FY11. But that's just to give you an idea of what our current funding level is in general. And then we also have a column on the coordinating board's legislative appropriations request. just to remind you of where we're at in terms of what we requested back last summer. Then you have the House bill version that passed the House on April 4th, and the differences between the base and the LER, and then you have the Senate Finance Committee version. If you turn to page 4, you'll see the grand totals, and you'll see that the Senate bill actually has $445.2 million more than the House version. And this represents a 20% reduction from the 10-11 base and a 15% reduction if you compared that to our legislative appropriations request. More than half of the Senate increase, which is about $295 million in general revenue and $10.5 million in general revenue dedicated, went to support the major student financial aid programs. To highlight the financial aid programs, we did another side-by-side for you that shows you Texas Grant, TEOG, Be On Time, Top 10%, Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program, TEG, and Work Study. We provided you with what the appropriation was for 10-11, what the funding levels were originally when House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1 was introduced, and you'll recall that those funding levels were intended only for renewal students in these programs. Then you'll see House Bill 1, the engrossed version, and what those funding levels were, and then the committee, the Senate Finance Committee bill. You'll see that Work Study and TEOG were restored to 10-11 base level funding. And in the Senate version, you have Texas Grants is only reduced by 10%. And TEG is reduced by 20%. Be On Time, and I'm sorry, I'm going back to the spreadsheet. I'm sorry, this spreadsheet here. And if you look at B18, the Student Financial Aid Strategy, we've broken down the programs there. And you'll see the differences in the funding levels between the House bill and the Senate bill. For Be On Time, which we did not break out by GR and GR dedicated, the GR amount was reduced by 40% and general revenue dedicated was reduced by 23%. And Top 10%, moving down on the next page, was cut by 23%. But both bills also contain a contingency rider that would appropriate an additional $50 million for financial aid, and that would be the funding from the Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation. And I can highlight other, if you want to just take some time to look through that, or if you want to move on, I'd like to give you an update on outcomes-based funding next.
Linda,
Yes.
how many students, based on these numbers, will not be served?
Well, we served a total number of students in the current biennium, 106,000. So if you look at the financial aid spreadsheet, if the funding level in House Bill 1 is passed, the $365.7 million, we're going to be able to serve only renewal students at 44,200. So that means, we're going to be serving, I think it comes out to about 30% of eligible students. And I think Dan Weaver is here if you want to get into the specifics, if you have any questions about that. But if you go on to the Senate Finance Committee's funding level at $559.7 million, we can reach about 30,000 new students in addition to the renewal students. That still doesn't get us to where we are now. But we do have, in the Senate bill, there is a contingency rider in the Article 11 wish list that would restore the funding to the current level.
That would be another $62 million approximately.
Correct.
And where is that in terms of the priority ranking in Article 11?
Well, they don't prioritize in that way. So long as it's in the article, they can pluck out once they get to conference committee. They can pluck out whatever they prioritize, and I believe, based on the conversations we've been hearing, Texas Grant is a huge priority for the legislature.
So in the current version of SB 1 is adopted by this, or recommended by the Senate Finance Committee, an additional 30,000 new students, that would put us a little over 74,200 students as opposed to 106,000 last biennium. So we're
Current biennium.
I'm sorry, the current biennium. So that would be, that figure was about 70% of eligible students, and this base proposal would be about between 70 and 75% of that 70%. So we would be down around, Mossy Meadows down around 50% is what I'm hearing from those numbers, without the Article 11 additional funding.
Right.
Members, any other questions before we move on to the next legislative subject, outcomes-based funding? Linda?
So we've provided you with a one-pager summarizing where we're at with outcomes-based funding. There is a rider in the House Appropriations Bill, as reported to you previously, that implements outcomes-based funding for universities according to the coordinating board's proposal. The House bill, however, does not include momentum points for community colleges, but the Senate bill does appropriate $12.55 million for momentum points. This is on top of the formula funding, and this is just for the community colleges. It doesn't include the technical colleges or the state colleges. The funds would be trusteed to the coordinating board, and we would allocate them based on the momentum points to community colleges in FY13. The Senate bill also includes a contingency rider in Article 11 that would appropriate $80 million for the Performance Incentive Fund. And this is the current incentive fund for universities that's also on top of the formula. In terms of, that's the appropriations process. In terms of the legislation, House Bill 9 by branch, which would simply direct the coordinating board to implement or to incorporate outcomes-based metrics in your formula funding recommendations to the legislature. That has cleared the House Higher Education Committee, and it's now in House calendars, which is awaiting being put on this major state calendar for a second reading, which would go to the entire House. So we're waiting on that.
Questions? Comments?
So just very quickly, the next step is that the Senate version of the appropriations bill is actually on the regular order of business for today, but I'm told that it's very unlikely that the Senate will get to it today. So either tomorrow or sometime later this week or next week, we'll see the Senate take a vote on that. Once that passes the Senate, then a conference committee will be appointed. The lieutenant governor will appoint 5 senators, and the speaker will appoint 5 representatives. That concludes my portion. I'm going to turn it over to Dominic, who's going to give you an update on the legislation.
Good morning. Just in your books, you should have a table that outlines some of the key legislation that we're tracking this session, most of which are recommendations that the board made back last October, and others are kind of other key pieces of legislation that staff has identified as important to track throughout the session. Obviously, at the time of this printing, there's been a lot of activity, and so the status on these has been changing and will change now almost on an hourly basis in some cases. But what I want to do is just highlight a couple key pieces of legislation and talk through where they are and prospects. First of all, as many of you received an email update, I believe it was last week, I'm slowly or quickly losing track of time. Senate Bill 28 related to the Texas Grant Priority Model, based on the recommendations of this board, moving the Texas Grant Program to a 2 of 4 in terms of academic criteria, in addition to need for qualifying for a Texas grant, has now cleared the second chamber with some amendments. And so where it is now in the process is Senator Zaffirini and her staff are evaluating the amendments that were made by the House to determine whether they will concur with those changes or whether they'll ask for a conference committee on one or all of those changes. And so we're hearing from Senator Zaffarini's office that that decision may be made in the next 24 to 48 hours, and we'll know what the next step is. If she concurs and the Senate votes for that concurrence, it will move on to the governor's office for signature. If she does not, it will go to a conference committee, and there's an additional step, and we'll kind of see how it goes from there. So that's one piece of legislation that is almost through the process, so we'll continue to keep you up to speed on that. Linda already talked about the outcomes-based funding legislation, so I won't talk about that, but a couple other key pieces of legislation. Developmental education, there's a couple pieces of legislation, but there's two of significant reform. One is Senate Bill 1564 by West, and you'll see that on page, I guess it's the second page, second table. Senate Bill 1564 and House Bill 1244 by Representative Castro. This was, if you'll recall from your recommendations on developmental education, we had a very modest recommendation in terms of this session for developmental education reform, because we were really looking for next session to be the big developmental education session to make major recommendations and major changes to developmental education based on some of the demonstration projects that we're currently conducting with the P16 division, et cetera. But what has happened is there's been almost organically in some cases, but also because of Stan Jones, who came and testified to the legislature in some key committees, and based on conversations that the commissioner and this board has had over the last few months about developmental education, there's been this organic sense that we need to move now. We don't want to wait. And so Senator West and Representative Castro have really taken a leadership role to start exploring some very critical reforms in this area as a platform to making some significant changes to improve developmental education. And so these are two pieces of legislation that we're watching. I think it's noteworthy that Senator West and Representative Castro have made this a key component of their legislative agenda, and so we'll keep tracking that, and I suspect we'll see something come out of this session related to DevEd, which is a pleasant surprise because, again, there was not an expectation that that was going to be something as a significant piece of legislation. So we'll see how that works its way through these last 30 days or so. The next piece of legislation that we're hoping the Senate may take action today at the earliest is Senate Bill 1799 and SGR 50 by Senator West. This is legislation that is going to expand the coordinating board's bonding capacity for our Hinson Hazelwood loan program. As you know, we offer low-income loans to students, particularly in this environment with financial aid. This is, we believe, a critical time to expand that program. And so these two pieces of legislation go hand in hand, and one will require an approval by the voters to authorize our bonding capacity. But we're hoping that may clear the Senate very soon, and then we'll have it in the House and see how it goes from there. If you go to the next page, you talked a little bit during your discussion on the $10,000 degree discussion about transfers and articulation agreements and 2+2 strategies. You'll recall the cost efficiency study, as again it was mentioned this morning, had a recommendation about statewide articulation agreements to really improve efficiency. So if you look at the bottom of page 3, House Bill 3025 by Chairman Branch related to facilitating transfer of students between our institutions has left House Higher Education Committee is waiting for to be set on the full House calendar for a vote. There's also there's a number of other bills out there on the Senate side, some that Senator Zaffarini is carrying, that have elements of transfer. They're not dealing in a comprehensive way like House Bill 3025 does. But again, as we go through the process of these last 30 days, there may be a lot of discussion about consolidating legislation, or as some people, we're going to put something in someone else's bill. A lot of that activity happens in the last couple of days, and so I think there's a lot of momentum with some legislation to deal in a more comprehensive way with improving transfers, and so I think that's a positive sign and something we're going to keep track of in the last 30 days. Again, both in respect to the cost efficiency recommendations that this board made, but also the $10,000 degree challenge and those other things that's an important component of. In terms of additional cost efficiency information, if you look, I believe now it's on page 5, the top, Senate Bill 5. This is a major piece of legislation that the institutions related, whether you want to call it cost efficiencies or unfunded mandates, but it's legislation that's looking to relieve some of the bureaucratic and administrative burden on institutions to help save money and be more efficient and productive. That legislation is also poised for the Senate floor. There are a lot of moving parts in there. It reaches all parts of the code related to institutions of higher education, and so it's one of those bills that's kind of attracts a lot of activity, Christmas tree, if you will, and so there's a lot of moving parts in this, but we expect that the Senate will take this up relatively soon and move it over to the House, and hopefully this will provide some relief to the institutions in some areas, and something that we've been working closely with some of the institutional representatives to make sure we iron out and we make sure that the provisions in there are not just in terms of helping the institutions being more efficient, but also making sure the coordinating board continues to have the statewide oversight that I think is we're charged with doing. And so there's been some negotiation on language and other components of that legislation. And with that, just skimming through the rest, I think those are some of the major pieces of legislation that are out there. I will give you a bit of good news, knock on wood. House Bill 104, which would basically move the operations of the coordinating board to TEA and abolish the coordinating board, and for all intents and purposes, that legislation has not had a hearing. It likely won't have a hearing at this point. So that's just, I'll leave that to close the report. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Well, there would have been a silver lining in that, the time we would all get back. But what about, Dom, Senate Bill 40 was scheduled for a hearing just a few days ago, or actually a couple weeks ago. What's transpired since that hearing date?
That's related to the Texas Guaranteed. That bill was actually just this morning voted out of the Senate Higher Education Committee with a committee substitute. I've not seen the final committee substitute. We can circulate that, but it was voted out of committee this morning. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that reminded me what else happened, and this is important. I should have mentioned it. You'll recall that there's a couple pieces of legislation out there, both a couple bills in the Senate and a couple bills in the House, to determine how to distribute the NRUF funding. You'll recall under House Bill 51, we created the NRUF in this process of identifying which institutions reach the next stage for Tier 1 or national research status. But the question of how do you distribute the funds that are in that fund has not been settled. So there's a couple pieces of legislation with different methodologies that are out there to do that. House Bill 1000, which was Branch's methodology, Chairman Branch, did clear the House and was heard in the Senate this morning for consideration. Senator Zaffarini said from the dais, and if I get this wrong, I know Assistant Commissioner McGregor Stevenson was there as well, but she basically said there's still some disagreement amongst the 7 emerging research institutions as to how do you exactly do this. She basically threw down the gauntlet and said if we don't work this out in the next 5 to 6 days, there will be no legislation this session. And so that's, hopefully they'll see how that works itself out. And if I got that wrong, McGregor will.
Tom was very pleasant in his demeanor about it.
So we'll know more on that, but I'm glad you mentioned that. I forgot to mention that. That is an important piece of legislation, so we'll see how that works its way out.
Just a kind of a small facet, but important facet of that was the funding for awards of excellence to the non-emerging research institutions. This board recognized A&M Kingsville as the first designated Center for National Excellence with their Caesar Kleberg Wildlife Center. Does HB 1000 or any of the other bills contain the funding for that recognition?
The NRUF bills do not. I don't know if there's something in the appropriations.
No, there's nothing in the appropriations.
So our friends from South Texas should get busy with amendments, I suppose. Okay. Members, any questions about other pending legislation? I keep walking on you.
That's okay. You're the chair?
Live on this.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Agenda item, let's see, that's the one we just covered. Thank you very much. See, I think we're on G now, right? Did
Yeah,
we
we
just
added
cover
F.
A?
Yeah, we added F to the.
Right. Okay. Agenda items 8G1 through 3 were on the consent calendar. Agenda item 8H through K were also on the consent calendar. Item 8L, proposed rules. Items 8L1 through 3 were on the consent calendar. This is the one we put on. Item 8L4, consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 9, Program Development in Public Two-Year Colleges, Subchapter A, Section 9.1 of Board Rules concerning definitions. McGregor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is simply a definitional clarification within the rules to specify that we are talking about the voluntary statewide transfer compacts, such as we develop with mechanical engineering, so that when institutions are looking at the relevance in the development of these programs, that it relies on that definition and the work that we're doing in that area so that they receive the recognition for it.
Members, any questions? No, I'm sorry.
Just one. The language we're using is voluntary statewide transfer compact. That's the new
yes, sir.
Defined term. So I'm not sure what the legislation refers to, but if legislation uses the phrase statewide articulation agreements, is there going to be a...
It's consistent.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? If not, is there a motion to approve item 8L4? Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? None. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Agenda item 8L5, consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the Board relating to the proposed amendments of Chapter 9, Program Development in Public Two-Year Colleges, Subchapter J, Academic Associate Degree and Certificate Programs, Sections 9.183 and 9.185, concerning degree titles, program length, and program content, and academic certificates. McGregor?
Thank you, sir. And again, this is to explicitly lay out the voluntary statewide transfer compacts and that they can be a part of the academic associate's degree, and also that as long as an institution provides up to 50% of the voluntary statewide transfer compact, or that a student takes 50% of the transfer compact courses, that the institutions can give them a certificate for completing that portion of the transfer compact, and thus, as we're using the priority model and the momentum points, if we were to use those, they would get recognition for having completed at least that much of the transfer compact. The student would, as well as the institution. And
questions? Is there a motion to approve item 8L5?
So moved.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Any further discussion? If none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Agenda item 8L6. Are we withdrawing that? Okay. It's been requested to be withdrawn by staff. No further action needed if they've asked for it to be withdrawn. Is that correct, Mr. Chairman?
Unless there's any
Is there any objection?
questions as to...
Okay.
Do we have comments on it that have come in since the...
They're staying on our side.
Dan is on his way up to.
We nearly blew right by you, Dan.
Good morning. The two Hazelwood rules, the changes we felt like were relatively minor, and we didn't receive any feedback during the comment period. Subsequent to the committee meeting, we got some feedback from some institutions. It uncovered some, for lack of a better word, some unintended consequences that may result with the passage of that rule. So we felt like at the time that it would be better to pull the rule and a little bit go back to the drawing board to make sure that we weren't doing something that we regretted later.
Is this basically a reflection of the three comments we've received from UT Arlington, or is this
actually
feedback?
This is different feedback with regard to the time limit placed on when a Hazelwood exemption could be. The consideration of a Hazelwood exemption essentially put no end limit on when a veteran could come back and claim that exemption. Some of our institutions felt like that if we struck that language, we would be opening the door up very, very wide, and we didn't have any real clear guidance on how to actually execute that on a campus-by-campus basis. So we felt like rather than put the rule into place, it would be better to pull the rule and then to go back to the drawing board essentially and take another look at it.
All right. So that's actually items 8L6 and 7.
Correct.
To be withdrawn. Is there any objection? 7's withdrawn. Okay.
Do we need a motion?
Bill, do we need a motion
to withdraw
those?
Or table? Okay.
Is there a motion to withdraw?
So moved.
Is there a second? That's for items 8, L6 and 7. Is there a second?
Yes.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Agenda items 8L8 and 9 were on the consent calendar. Item 8M, discussion of the board task force recommendations relating to exceptions to the coordinating board rule 5.615, essential criterion for new doctoral degree programs. McGregor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In working with Mr. Hahn and Dr. Golden, we worked through and developed a set of 3 criteria that we believe will be beneficial for us in evaluating when an institution does not meet or exceed the statewide undergraduate graduation rate. And the 3 criteria that were agreed upon were the ratio of baccalaureate degrees awarded to the undergraduate enrollment, the total number of baccalaureate degrees awarded, and the number of baccalaureate degrees awarded to at-risk students. Now, for an institution to overcome the lower undergraduate graduation rate, they would have to demonstrate overall increase in productivity in each of the 3 measures, as well as meet or exceed the statewide measure for each of those. So it's almost a 6 measures rather than just 3, because we're looking at it in comparison to themselves as well as to the statewide measure. If an institution is able to meet or exceed all 3 of those, then they would simply need to also include a plan of action for how they are going to improve their graduation, their 6-year graduation rate with their application for a doctoral program, at which point then we would look at all of the other measures for the review of the doctoral program. And so the statewide measure undergraduate rate would not be the deciding factor. If they met 2 out of 3 of these 6 criteria, meeting it at the statewide and at the improvement at the institutional level, then they must not only submit an action plan for improving their graduation rate, they must also submit an action plan for improving the measure that they did not meet. So they can meet 2 out of 3, submit action plans for statewide and for that item, and we would still let them submit the application and would not automatically dismiss it. If they cannot meet 2 out of 3 of the measures, that's it. The proposal would not be considered. And so we think in this way that we've given sufficient opportunity for the institution to show alternate measures at which they're being successful, so that there is not that automatic negative just for the one measure of the undergraduate graduation rate compared to the statewide level. And we very much appreciate the help that Dr. Gold and Mr. Hahn provided, and the time that they took to work with us on this. And Dr. Lemoyne was very helpful.
McGregor, in reading this, one, I commend y'all that y'all came up with an alternative from our last discussion, but I'm still a little confused when it says meet or exceed the statewide level for each measure. I can understand how it's done on number 1, but are number 2 and number 3 absolute measure numbers? And how do you, it's the total number of baccalaureate degrees awarded and also the number of baccalaureate degrees awarded to at-risk students. So that's an absolute number. What's the number you're comparing to on a statewide level basis?
Increase year over year.
Okay, so it is percentage increase.
Absolute increase. Yeah.
Well,
I'm sorry, wait a minute.
How do you compare that to the statewide level because of the
right.
difference in
percentage
institutions?
Increase? I'm sorry.
Okay, I think we really need to clarify, because I was really confused when I read that. I was reading that as an absolute measure, and I didn't. You're comparing a.
So that's a good point, Whit. Under A, about increased productivity for each measure at the institution, it would be an absolute number, but in terms of the statewide, meeting or exceeding statewide level, we would be comparing to the percentage increase versus the statewide average increase.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
And we'll lay that out more explicitly when we put the procedures down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In essence, McGregor, with this being just, we had average 6-year cohort graduation rate, it gives an institution an opportunity to still come to the table.
Correct, and to show where they're meeting or exceeding statewide measures in comparable areas.
Very good. Any questions, comments?
I just think the only other comment I'd make, Chairman Hahn, is that when we say that they need to submit an action plan that's deemed acceptable, that we look at those action plans as for rigor, and that we don't just say, okay, check, the paper's in.
No, sir. We'll make sure that before we proceed forward that there is an appropriate action plan in place that has measurable targets for them to achieve over the following years. Yes, sir.
McGregor will make certain that happens.
To the best of my ability.
Okay. And there's no further action. That was
no, sir. That's simply a discussion item.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Agenda item 8N. Report on proposals approved by the commissioner or assistant commissioner since the previous board meeting. This is an information item. Are there any questions, comments? Let's see, and is that since the first of the year, right?
Yes, sir, since the January meeting.
This is an information item only, and there are no further comments. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the business of the Committee on Strategic Planning and Policy.
Thank you, Harold. Since there's only one more item of business before going back to Article 7, I would propose that we now move on to item 9, matters relating to the Committee on Agency Operations, which is chaired by Whit Ryder. Mr. Ryder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very brief report. We had our meeting yesterday, and we reviewed 5 different sets of reports. One, we got an update on the RO report, and as well as the financial report and our report on facilities, and then also heard about the work that's being done on IT governance here at the coordinating board. The key program that we spent probably more time in talking about than any of the others was the Federal Family Education Loan Program. And this is, I had asked Dr. Alonzo to have this, to talk about this, the agenda as part of our report, and because this dates back to I think I've been on the board 6.5 years, and I think it was Joe was here when it came up. But for everybody else that's on the board, they probably have not heard about this, and so I thought it was extremely important as we close this chapter that we report it to the board so that they understood what the settlement was going to be. And we've asked Mr. Dan Weaver to come up and give us the 5-minute version instead of the 15 or 20-minute version that we had yesterday. Thank you, Dan.
So y'all are zipping through the schedule very, very nicely today.
Thank you, Dan.
The 5-minute schedule. You're welcome, Mr. Chairman. The 5-minute update. In 2006, the State Auditor's Office conducted an audit, which is the annual audit, A133 audit on the Federal Family Education Loan Program, otherwise known as the Stafford Loan Program, which the coordinating board has been operating for many, many years. They took a little different view in 2006, and they looked at our entire portfolio of loans, as opposed to just looking at loans that were not in our judgment portfolio. And at that particular time in 2006, that was new information to the board that they really hadn't been privy to in the past. They uncovered some instances of the board overbilling in certain types of accounts during a time period that reached back into the 1970s. So it was a exhaustive audit. They uncovered went and looked in every nook and cranny, and this is one of the areas that they uncovered. We really didn't have a very good way of identifying the amount of money that had been overbilled during that time period because it ranged so far back and it was a fairly narrow population of students. In the ensuing couple of years, we went back and forth with the department trying to come up with a methodology that they were comfortable with and that we were comfortable with that actually identified what that amount of money was that we overbilled, because we both acknowledged that we owed it back to the department. In 2009, the department came and did a program review for a couple of days at the end of March in 2009, at which time we kind of locked in on what that methodology was, and then we subsequently submitted a letter to the department at the end of May of 2009 with an overbilled amount of about $269,000. The department took a long time to digest this particular letter and their particular program review, and then they came back at the March of 2011, a couple months ago, with a program review that had 7 findings, and 2 of the findings were in and around this $269,000 overbilling. So we responded to those particular findings, and then we got word last week that the department had accepted our $269,000 overbill. They closed 4 of the 7 findings, and then there was one other small finding that resulted in a $200 error from 2004 that we also owed back to the department. So we're in a position now of being able to close this particular audit. It's taken many, many years to get through. It's taken hundreds of hours of staff time at both the department level and within the coordinating board. We have sufficient cash within the loan program, within the top fund, to cover that particular payment. We felt like that the board needed to hear the full story because it went back so far. And I apologize that Mr. Hinton isn't here again to kind of hear this, because he was instrumental in making all of this happen at that particular time. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
And you might just also, I thought your explanation yesterday was a couple of things. Since all this has happened, a new loan system's gone in, the Helms loan system. And so I think we've got a lot more better controls built in where we'll never see this happen. And this was almost just the result of one switch not having been made to pick this up. This was not anything that was intentional or anything on, obviously, the part of the coordinating board to overbill. It was a, you might explain this, exactly how it happened, just so the board will understand.
The old, I'm not an IT person, maybe Sid could come up here, but the old mainframe had certain switches that were in place, so if you didn't switch something off, then you would continue to operate under that same program logic. So these particular accounts, for whatever reason, that program switch hadn't been turned off. So in a instance, there were, I think, 10 deceased borrowers, and they could have been deceased for many, many years. That flag never got switched over. So it kept churning, and because the audit, the view of the audit never took into a consideration the judgment portfolio, it was never uncovered. So this 2006 audit, because it looked at the full breadth of the full program, exposed these errors. And at that particular time, it was, yes, now that we've identified that, it was immediately, the switches were turned, so it capped it immediately in 2006. And then with the conversion to Helm in 2007 and subsequent integration of Helm into our normal business practices, we've remedied all of those other findings that existed at that particular time. The difficult part was trying to identify, well, how much, and that's what we all struggle with for such a long time. I'm very comfortable with the value that we came up with. I feel is fair and it's reasonable, and I think it's representative of what actually occurred. And I think because of the department's response, I think that they concur with that. I think that, back to your point, Mr. Ryder, it's the issues were dealt with immediately as they could have been, and then subsequent to our conversion in a timely manner. And I think that we're in a much more stable position now, specific to the federal loan program, of which we continue to get A133 audits every year. And KPMG's been doing it for the last few years, and I think that we've had very few, if any, findings with regard to that particular program.
And the good news is this is really kind of the close of the chapter of going all the way back, we believe, to this. So, and I want to commend Dan and his staff. Joe Hinton also. I mean, he goes long back. There's a lot of work that was done on the conversion, and that predates most of the folks sitting up here, but a lot of good work. And so anyway, I'm glad to close it, but we want to make sure we just apprise the board of this. We'll be making this settlement payment here, I'll assume, very soon.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that was over a 35-year period.
Dates back to
Dated
71.
back into the 70s, yes.
The 70s. Mm-hmm.
Back when they used card decks to turn these binary switches.
That was before I started at the coordinating board also.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just note, I've asked staff to make a copy of the letter that we received, the final determination letter, and I believe they put it at your places. So that gives you all the details of what Dan just summarized.
Okay, thank you very much. That is, again, a report item. There's no formal action to be taken by the board. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it. Agenda items 9B and 9C are on the consent calendar. This is the easiest chairmanship I've ever had to do on the board. And having all consent items, I like it. So that concludes my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ryder. We'll now return to agenda item 7. And for agenda item 7, executive session, the board will meet in a closed meeting to deliberate the following matters. A, under the Texas Government Code Section 551.074, the board will meet in closed session to discuss personal evaluation of Raymond Paredes, Commissioner of Higher Education, and other personnel matters. The time is now 11:46. The closed meeting of the board is now adjourned, and this meeting is again in open session. The time is 1:33 p.m. The chair will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting. Nope, let me back up. The chair will entertain a motion for the matters discussed during closed session.
Make the motion.
You had to make
Can you state the motion?
You'll need to read it in the record.
Yeah. I move that authority to investigate and make the ultimate decision as discussed in the closed session be delegated to board chair Fred and vice chair and the chair of AOC.
Chair of Agency Operations. Is there a second?
I so second.
We have a motion from Durga and a second from Dennis. All in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Thank you, Durga. And now the chair will entertain a motion to adjourn
So
the board
moved.
meeting.
Second.
I say.
We have a motion in several seconds. All in favor, stand up and leave the dais.
Say aye.
Aye.